Nanette Krentel grew up in New Orleans in a humble, close-knit family. Her parents, Dan and Pat Watson, raised her along with her siblings Kim, Eliza, and 3 half-siblings and taught her important values of loyalty and kindness, known for her gentle and caring nature. Nanette had a deep love for animals and shared her home with 2 cats and a dog. Despite moving away, she maintained a close bond with her family, especially her father and sisters, speaking with them daily. In 1994, at 27 years old, Nanette met Steve Krentel while applying for a job at his office supply store. Steve, then 28, owned both a scuba gear business and the store, and was going through a divorce at the time. Their professional relationship soon turned romantic, and after Steve finalized his divorce, he introduced Nanette to his young son, Justin. By 1995, they were married. Steve's native of Louisiana. He grew up near Lacombe and reportedly had a tense relationship with his brother, Brian. In 2000, Steve and Nanette moved to Lacombe, closer to his parents. He gradually worked his way up in the Tammany Parish Fire Department, eventually becoming the fire chief. Respected for his professionalism, his career in the fire department provided him with financial security and influence in the community. In 1997, after Steve sold both of his businesses, Nanette shifted her career path. She began working at a daycare center, where her kind and attentive nature earned the trust of parents and co-workers. Beyond her job, she became involved in the community, organizing fundraisers and charitable events, as well as supporting local fire departments by selling handmade ceramics and baked goods. By 2017, she had been out of the workforce for several years, focusing instead on her home, her pets, and continued community involvement. Although she had no children, Nanette was always concerned and attentive to the lives of her loved ones. She often played a central role in family matters, offering emotional and financial support to her loved ones. To outsiders, she and Steve seemed to lead a peaceful life, residing on 100 acres of scenic remote property in Lacombe. However, behind closed doors, Nanette grew increasingly concerned for her safety after Steve's brother, Brian, was released from prison. Brian allegedly blamed Nanette for the legal issues that led to his incarceration and had made direct threats against her. In response, she urged for additional security measures, having cameras installed around the property and keeping protective tools in her bedroom, car, and purse. She openly shared her fears with her family. Her father and sisters, aware of the escalating tension, were alarmed but did not anticipate just how grave the situation would become. Steve was also concerned and worked with Nanette to increase security. He installed additional cameras, purchased self-defense equipment, and even practiced shooting with her at a local shooting range. However, despite these precautions, the simmering problems in their family did not go away. Behind the facade of a peaceful life, there were bitter family conflicts, growing tensions, and the choices ahead led to unforeseen consequences. On July 14, 2017, at around 2:30 p.m., the St. Tammany Parish Fire Department received an urgent call from Steve's cousin, who lived nearby. He reported seeing thick smoke rising from Steve's property and suspected the house was on fire. Despite the distance between their homes and the dense forest in between, the fire was visible from afar. Steve and his team arrived at the scene around 3 p.m. when the house was engulfed in flames. Firefighters worked into the evening to extinguish the fire, only to discover human remains in the bathroom of the master bedroom. The damage was extensive, but the location of the remains and the fact that no one else lived there indicated the victim was likely Nanette, Steve's wife. No alarms had sounded, and throughout the day, Steve's repeated calls to both Nanette's cell phone and the house landline had gone unanswered. Her car remained in the garage, further confirming she had been home at the time of the fire. Tragically, all the household pets also perished, reflecting the sudden and intense nature of the flames. Federal fire investigation specialists joined the inquiry. Initially, the fire was considered a possible accident, but the circumstances surrounding Nanette's death raised suspicions. Her remains were found in the bathroom, and there was no indication she had tried to escape. This prompted a forensic autopsy, which included DNA testing and an investigation into the cause of death. About a week later, during a memorial service, part of the coroner's preliminary findings became public. It was revealed that Nanette had suffered a gunshot wound to the head, with a bullet found in her skull. This discovery completely shifted the direction of the investigation. On July 18th, the sheriff confirmed the findings, apologized for the delay in communication, and acknowledged evidence of a criminal act. Further autopsy results showed no smoke inhalation in Nanette's lungs, proving that she had died before the fire. Since no weapon was found near her body, the possibility of self-inflicted injuries has been ruled out. The investigation further revealed the presence of 9 security cameras on the property, but Steve stated that the system had stopped functioning several days before the fire. Efforts to recover footage from the damaged equipment were unsuccessful. This lack of evidence, combined with forensic findings, suggested the fire had been intentionally set to destroy evidence. Investigators shifted their focus to individuals who might have had both motive and access to the property. However, an official statement confirming foul play in Nanette's death was not released until 4 days after the fire. The family's frustration with the investigation grew, particularly because the coroner had noted the gunshot wound the day after the incident, yet this information wasn't immediately shared with them. Nanette's sister, Kim, a prosecutor in Nebraska, publicly criticized the investigation, pointing to the lack of proper scene containment, which may have compromised evidence. When Nanette's relatives arrived in Louisiana shortly after the tragedy, they found the property unsecured and the house open. Within 2 days, Steve was allowed to return to the site, raising concerns about evidence being altered or lost. It wasn't until Steve's son, Justin, discovered a fragment of a human skull in the debris that authorities finally secured the scene. The incident has left the public losing confidence in Sheriff Randy Smith's department. While federal investigators conduct an independent analysis, they discovered multiple points of ignition and traces of accelerants, confirming the fire was deliberately set. Despite these findings, however, the sheriff did not rule out the possibility that Julie harmed herself, citing the lack of a recovered weapon and inconclusive ballistics test results. Later, 2 firearms were found in the remains of the home, but neither could be definitively linked to the fatal shot. The bullet recovered from Nanette's skull was too damaged for reliable analysis. Additional forensic tests reinforced previous findings, including finding no smoke in Nanette's lungs and no food in her stomach. Despite her having been seen purchasing food at a fast food restaurant that morning, additional inconsistencies came to light during the investigation. There was no blood on Nanette's gunshot wound to the head, as is often the case, leading to speculation that her body may have been moved after her death. An independent expert suggested that whoever moved her was likely familiar with the layout of the house. The sheriff, however, publicly disputed the forensic expert's conclusions. This discrepancy with the findings of federal agents further undermined public confidence in the investigation. Nanette's family began openly questioning the integrity of local authorities and raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest. As discrepancies mounted, the sheriff was eventually compelled to issue a public statement, acknowledging that Nanette's death resulted from a violent act. Despite this admission, the investigation failed to identify the person responsible. The case shifted towards exploring possible motives and suspects with access to the property. Nanette's husband, Steve, was naturally a key subject of interest due to his unrestricted access to the house. He willingly cooperated, volunteered for a polygraph test, and passed. However, since polygraph results are not entirely reliable, investigators didn't eliminate him as a suspect. Steve's alibi was backed by fire department security footage confirming he was at work on the day of the incident, starting at 8 a.m., and didn't leave at any point, including during lunch. This was corroborated by surveillance footage and his co-workers' testimonies. However, it was noted that Steve working on a Friday was unusual, as he usually took that day off. Investigators also analyzed Nanette's movements on the morning of July 14th. Traffic cameras spotted her driving between her home and a nearby fast food restaurant, where her bank card was used to buy food. Her car was later seen near her house. About an hour later, a phone call was made from Nanette's phone to an unfamiliar number. The person on the other end claimed not to know her, and the reason for the call remains unexplained. Investigators explored potential personal conflicts and discovered that Steve had been in an extramarital relationship with a colleague. Nanette was aware of the affair and had told others she was considering divorce, which under state law would involve dividing their shared assets, an arrangement that could have been financially disadvantageous for Steve. When questioned, Steve admitted to the affair but claimed the couple had reconciled and planned to stay together. Close family members were also questioned. Steve's son, Justin, had reportedly experienced tension with his stepmother, Julie. In the past, family acquaintances described him as having unusual interests, including a fascination with firearms. However, Justin provided documentation proving he was out of state for work on the day of the incident, which was verified, ruling him out as a suspect. Investigators also looked into Steve's brother, Brian, who had a criminal record and a history of family conflicts. Over the years, Nanette had voiced concerns about his behavior. Shortly after his release from prison, she sent her sister a message describing a specific threat from him, in which he allegedly displayed aggressiveness and hinted at setting the house on fire. These claims were corroborated through their text exchanges. Surveillance footage from their parents' home showed Brian did not leave the premises on the day of Nanette's death. However, a wearable tracking device issued to him malfunctioned and failed to record any location data that day, with the cause of this failure unexplained. Another puzzling incident occurred a month before Nanette's death. A security camera recorded an unidentified man near the entrance gate of the property. He left behind a cigarette butt and a knife. Nanette informed her father about the incident, but the man's identity remained unclear and no investigation was conducted to find out more. After investigating multiple leads, the case remained unsolved. Every suspect either had a confirmed alibi or there wasn't enough evidence to make a formal accusation, leaving the investigation at a dead end. 2 months after Nanette's death, the sheriff made another public announcement. He declared that Steve was no longer a person of interest in the case, explaining that Steve's alibi had been verified. There was no clear motive, and the evidence was deemed insufficient to move forward. However, Nanette's family felt this announcement was premature, as not all digital records had been reviewed. Several witnesses had yet to be re-interviewed, and a detailed timeline of her phone activity leading up to her death was still incomplete. It appeared the investigation was entering a state of stagnation. When Nanette's family requested access to the case documents, their attempts were met with vague responses. Louisiana state law restricts access to investigative materials to the closest next of kin, which in this case was Steve, not Nanette's parents or sisters. Steve did not share these documents with the rest of the family. In search of answers, Nanette's relatives turned to private attorneys and independent forensic experts. One expert, after examining the available evidence, identified signs of deliberate investigative mismanagement, noting that critical protocols for handling cases involving violent deaths and burnt evidence had been disregarded. The conclusions and methodologies of the private experts sharply contrasted with those of the local authorities. Efforts to transfer the case to a different jurisdiction proved unsuccessful. Appeals to the district attorney's office were dismissed, with officials citing a lack of legal justification to relocate the investigation. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Nanette's family turned to social media, launching a page to provide updates and highlight inconsistencies in the investigation, in the hope of pressuring authorities into action. However, the sheriff's actions became a significant obstacle to achieving transparency. His public statements, dismissal of expert findings, and personal connections to individuals potentially linked to the case raised concerns about his impartiality and deepened public mistrust. Despite multiple individuals with potential motives, the investigation failed to reach a definite conclusion. Detectives worked on verifying alibis, analyzing technical records, and identifying gaps in the official narrative. But these efforts often revealed inconsistencies that undermined the credibility of the evidence. A key issue was the absence of location data from the Jeep's-enabled ankle monitor worn by Brian. On July 14th, the day of the incident, the monitor registered no location data, an unexplained blackout. Authorities were unable to determine whether the failure was a technical error or whether the monitor had been intentionally disabled. This missing data represented a major accountability failure and raised serious questions. Another troubling discovery came from a review of footage from a security camera inside Brian's parents' home. The video depicted Brian with a working desk lamp and a visible wall clock in the background, ostensibly providing an alibi. However, Nanette's family questioned the authenticity of this footage, suggesting it could have been pre-recorded or staged. Experts also observed that the angle and focus of the camera appeared unusual for a standard household surveillance setup. Additional uncertainty arose with surveillance footage from a fast food establishment showing Nanette's vehicle. Investigators assumed she was driving the car that morning, but the video quality was too poor to verify her identity. This assumption was based solely on her bank card being used to make a purchase nearby. The situation was further complicated by the fact that there was no footage from her home surveillance system on the day of the incident. Steve claimed the cameras had not been operational at the time, but investigators later found traces of accelerant on the damaged equipment. Experts concluded that the security system had likely been intentionally tampered with before the fire, suggesting someone with knowledge of the camera's locations and purpose had interfered. After Nanette's father passed away, her sisters took the lead in demanding a proper investigation. They launched an online awareness campaign, collaborated with advocacy groups, and participated in discussions on crime-focused platforms. The family repeatedly urged state authorities to transfer the case to an independent investigative body, but their requests were consistently met with generic responses that lacked meaningful action. They were also frustrated by the investigators' failure to review footage from the citywide surveillance system, which could have offered critical context. These shortcomings formed the basis of formal complaints to the district attorney's office. Although officials promised to keep the case open, there was no evidence of real progress, receiving minimal support from local law enforcement. Nanette's family shifted their focus to building a network of allies. They connected with organizations specializing in unresolved cases, which led to increased attention on Nanette's death through podcasts, videos, and media coverage. By 2024, the case remained unsolved. However, new hope appeared when Colin Sims was elected district attorney. Colin publicly expressed his willingness to review the evidence, marking the first sign of possible investigative progress after nearly 7 years of inaction. As of March 2024, Nanette's case was still open, with no charges filed against any suspects. Despite coroner findings, witness testimonies, and independent assessments, authorities in St. Tammany Parish had yet to identify any responsible parties. What initially seemed like a straightforward case had instead devolved into a prolonged stalemate. By mid-2025, the case records were still sealed, and only individuals with legal standing, such as Nanette's husband, Steve, were granted access. The family remained barred from reviewing complete investigative reports, transcripts, or relevant surveillance data. Repeated appeals to state authorities went unanswered. In response, a grassroots group formed by Nanette's friends and family continued to provide social media updates, urging the public to come forward with any useful information. The family also sought assistance from federal agencies like the Department of Justice. In their letters, they raised concerns about potential conflicts of interest involving local authorities and petitioned for the case to be transferred to a higher jurisdiction. Independent experts consulted by the family identified numerous investigative avenues that had not been fully explored, including recovering deleted digital records and re-interviewing key witnesses. However, without official investigative authority, these proposals could not be enforced. Despite years of stagnation, Nanette's family has never stopped fighting for answers. For them, this is about more than personal grief. It is a pursuit of justice. The lack of progress has only strengthened their resolve. They firmly believe the truth can still be uncovered if independent expertise is brought in and the case is reviewed impartially. As of this report, the case remains open but inactive. Nanette Krentel's story highlights how errors, delays, and possible bias can obstruct justice in a major case. Yet, it also demonstrates the unwavering resilience of a family determined to keep her memory alive. Their goal remains unchanged: to uncover the truth, no matter how much time has passed or how many obstacles stand in their way.
Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Carolyn Watson. If kidnapping is not about satisfying the criminal's painful desires, then most often, the attackers seek money. But it is not always that simple. Some frightening actions have a much more mundane nature. Budgery, in Australia, does not seem like a place where something terrifying could happen. It is a rural and remote area with a population of fewer than 200 people. Located in the peaceful region of Victoria, it is not even marked on all maps. The local community consists of only a few dozen families, and everyone knows each other well. However, this calm and measured pace did not prevent criminal stories from surfacing. The media began to write about the quiet and prosperous life in Budgery, which changed in 2008 due to an event that made the entire continent shudder. A man named Julian Buchwald, 25, lived there. His family owns a large piece of land in the area. Julian had a girlfriend, 17-year-old Carolyn Watson, who lived in a neighboring town. They had been dating for about 2 years. Even in his younger years, Julian loved to explore the surroundings, especially his plot of land, to satisfy his natural curiosity. The difficult terrain, combined with the abundance of vegetation, offered plenty of opportunities for imagination and exploration. Both Julian and Carolyn continued to live with their parents. Despite dating for 2 years, they were very serious about their relationship. They often discussed the prospects of marriage. Being deeply religious individuals, just like their families, they even visited the local pastor of the church to declare their desire to marry during a Sunday service, where they had first met. Faith played a significant role in their lives. On the morning of March 4, 2008, Julian picked up Carolyn from her home for a picnic. She lived in the neighboring town of Churchill, which was a bit larger, with about 5,000 people. It was located about 20 minutes away by car from Budgery. After leaving, they returned to Julian's house because he had forgotten some food in the car that could spoil in the heat. They gathered everything they needed and quickly left before it got too hot. Typically, Julian and Carolyn would relax on Julian's family property, where there were plenty of secluded spots that looked picturesque for a romantic outing. However, this time, they decided to venture further to visit a nearby waterfall. Around 3 p.m., they planned to return. Most of the journey went smoothly, but just before reaching the waterfall, Julian suddenly became alarmed. He noticed the carcass of an animal on the side of the road, so he slowed down and stopped at a safe distance around a small bend. He told Carolyn that he wanted to get out to check, as he thought the animal might still be alive and he could help it. This curiosity wasn't unusual for him. Carolyn had gotten used to these quirks and decided to wait for him inside the SUV while following his movements in the rearview mirror. At some point, Carolyn became distracted. When she looked back again, she no longer saw Julian. She assumed he had gone behind a hill or a turn, which is why she was out of view. But after some time, Julian still hadn't returned, and this began to worry her. He always came back quickly. Realizing they were far from the city and in the wilderness, Carolyn was afraid to get out of the car. Her boyfriend's absence increasingly troubled her. Suddenly, she caught sight of something even more frightening in the mirror. A figure darted into view. She saw a man standing next to the car. He looked threatening, fully dressed with gloves, and wearing a balaclava. Carolyn intended to lock the doors of the car, but the stranger had already jumped to her side, opened the door. Before she could react, pulled her out of the car and threw her to the ground. He covered her mouth with tape, silencing her screams, and she could barely resist. Within minutes, the kidnapper had bound and blindfolded her, then shoved her into the trunk of his car. Terrified, Carolyn hoped that Julian would return to save her. However, the kidnapper got behind the wheel and drove away, leaving her alone with her fear. She tried to escape, but the ropes were too tight to loosen. It felt like the trip lasted several hours. Eventually, the SUV came to a stop, the trunk opened. The kidnapper, still wearing a balaclava and gloves, stood in front of her again. He threw her onto the ground, and Carolyn realized she was still unable to free herself from her bindings. Despite her desperate attempts to do so, she had little idea of where she was located, but she saw that there was a dense forest surrounding her. The stranger tore off her clothes, using a knife to cut away her underwear, and then walked away. Carolyn was completely naked, lying next to the car. She heard a sound as if the kidnapper was digging. This noise came from a few meters away. Carolyn realized that she was about to die. She could not imagine what awaited her, but she understood that she would not get out of here alive. The only thing she could do in such a situation was to pray. At that time, Julian's mother and father noticed their absence and that both had left by car. Julian and Carolyn told their parents that they were going on a picnic together but did not specify the location. They were expected to return around 3 p.m., but the clock now read around 5 p.m. While everything could be attributed to youth and passion, Julian and Carolyn was always very responsible, was never late, especially for an extended period. Julian's mother called her son, but he didn't answer. Carolyn also ignored the calls. This was uncharacteristic for them, as they always stayed in touch. A delay of several hours seemed unthinkable, considering that they had not warned anyone that they would be late. The parents inspected the area around the house but found no traces of Julian and Carolyn. A search operation alone on such a large piece of land seemed pointless, so Julian's mother decided to return to the house and wait for them in the driveway. Suddenly, she discovered something strange. She saw a glint as from glass and found a bottle with a note inside that was stuck in the fence mesh. She read it, and its contents horrified her. Some criminal had written that he had kidnapped Julian and Carolyn. The text was full of obscene language. The criminal warned the parents not to report it to the police, otherwise, Carolyn would be burned alive, and Julian would die in agony. The kidnapper spoke of some business he had to attend to, stating that if he succeeded, the children would return home safe and sound, but only if the parents complied with all his demands. This message horrified she. Though she panicked, she was not going to follow the demands of the criminal and reported the matter to the police. Law enforcement officers immediately responded to the call and began to inspect the area, which was rugged terrain with a lot of vegetation. There was much work to be done. Relatives hoped that Julian and Carolyn had secluded themselves in the area since they rarely left Butchery. The family's situation worsened when Julian's relatives found out that both Julian's and Carolyn's families had received ominous notes. The families of Julian and Carolyn and the detectives met to discuss what had happened. Carolyn's father found a similar bottle on the porch of their house, which contained a message insisting that they not contact the police, also threatening to kill Julian and Carolyn. Even worse, he promised to deal with the entire family if his demands were violated. Everyone wondered what could possibly have motivated the hatred toward this sweet couple of young people. Initially, it was believed that that were just a cruel joke. Now the police had two notes, as well as the real disappearance of Julian and Carolyn. Until late in the evening, neither Julian nor Carolyn had made contact. The handwriting in both letters was identical. That means that the two families may have a common enemy. However, no one had the slightest idea who he might be. It was curious that the note contained a symbol that seemed to have an occult nature. Some group that considered Christians their enemies. This was considered a valuable clue, and it was quickly discovered that it was used by a certain satanic cult called the Order of Nine Angles. The history of this organization was checked and found that it had appeared in Great Britain back in the 60s, was actively luring in members in the 70s. However, the cult did not become widespread and did not have a large number of followers. Some of its members were being held accountable for extremist ideology and various threats. As the activists gained notoriety, the group opened branches in several countries around the world. Their ideology included isolating their members from the rest of society. They openly advocated for violence and committing crimes against perceived enemies, specifically targeting Christians whom they recognized as opponents to be destroyed. The most frightening aspect of this movement's activities was the propaganda promoting human sacrifices, which horrified families and prompted the police to intensify their efforts. Julian and Carolyn were simply devout Christians. Interestingly, until that point, the activities of this group had only been observed in Australia. They could potentially attempt to declare themselves by committing their first ritual murder. Satanists might use the sacrifice of Julian and Carolyn to gain fame from there began to gather like-minded people. The relatives did not receive any news for several days. Julian's car was declared wanted, but that didn't help. All the detectives' efforts proved in vain as they couldn't find either Julian and Carolyn or any leads on where to continue searching. Considering who Carolyn and Julian may have contacted, it was believed that it would be impossible to return them alive. The relatives knew that they had packed only a small amount of food meant to last a few hours. They had no worn clothes and no equipment. They did not have tents to survive the temperature fluctuations that occur in Australia during the day and night. There were also concerns about dangerous areas where Julian and Carolyn could fall victim to predators. The scorching heat and hunger posed significant threats. Even if they escaped from their kidnappers, encounters with wild or poisonous animals could be deadly. The rescue operation transitioned to a recovery effort, but this, too, yielded no results. 6 days passed during which the families of Julian and Carolyn did not find any peace. Suddenly, a message arrived: Julian and Carolyn had been found. What was most astonishing was that both were relatively safe. They had simply emerged onto the roadway near the Alpine National Park. A passing farmer stopped to help and immediately reported their situation to the police. It was not surprising that law enforcement officers were unable to find any trace of the individuals Julian and Carolyn. The national park was several hundred kilometers from where they lived, requiring about a 6-hour drive by car. Julian sustained serious injuries. While making their way through the desert, he suffered sunburn, cuts from thorny bushes, blisters, and bruises all over his body. Nonetheless, aside from the extreme stress of their ordeal, they were otherwise fine. Detectives met with Julian and Carolyn to gather information and prevent potentially dangerous criminals from operating in the area. They first communicated with Carolyn, who detailed the horrific trials she endured after being kidnapped. She described being undressed, thrown to the ground, where she lay and prayed just a few meters away from her kidnapper, who was digging in the earth. She was certain that this was her grave. This agonizing wait continued interminably until the sounds of digging stopped. Carolyn heard footsteps moving away, and everything went silent. Realizing that the criminal had abandoned her, she knew she could not remain passive. Quickly, she attempted to free herself from her ropes, but they did not yield. Her hands hurt as she rubbed them until they bled. Suddenly, she heard Julian's voice calling her name as he crawled closer. He managed to rip off her blindfold and the duct tape from her mouth. Julian, also tied up and without clothes, had managed to free his hands. This allowed Julian to finally escape and then free Carolyn. However, the danger was not over. The kidnapper could return at any moment. There was no car, but the abandoned backpack and scattered contents of the trunk remained. They found supplies that they had taken with them for a picnic, gathered everything, and fled into the thicket. They wanted to get as far away from that place as possible to plan their next steps. Along the way, Julian recounted his story. He approached an animal lying on the side of the road to examine the body, but as he leaned over, he heard footsteps approaching quickly from behind. He didn't have time to react before he was attacked. He was struck on the back of the head hard enough to lose consciousness. According to Julian, when he awoke a few hours later, he immediately began calling out for Carolyn. The criminal was no longer nearby, having escaped in an SUV. Over the next few days, they desperately tried to reach the road, making their way through thick bushes. They risked encountering wild animals. Even the slightest bite from an Australian poisonous spider or snake could be fatal. Their supplies were very limited since they had packed only a small amount of food for their picnic, specifically. During the day, Julian and Carolyn suffered from the suffocating heat, risking sunstroke. At night, they struggled to stay warm, sharing a single sleeping bag. The situation was compounded by the fear that the kidnapper could pursue them and find them at any moment. Both Julian and Carolyn were completely unaware of why this had happened to them. The situation worsened when, a few days later, they unwittingly returned to the same place where they had been held hostage. As it turned out, they had made a large circle. Nevertheless, Julian took advantage of the situation. Despite his fear of being caught, he was able to steal clothes and any remaining food, improving the dire condition of the starving couple. However, everything came to an end quickly. Carolyn fell into despair, feeling that they could not be saved, and found solace only in prayer. Finally, God heard her pleas. After 6 days, they were able to find their way out of the dense bushes. They emerged onto the road, where the police spoke to Julian, for the most part, confirmed his girlfriend's account, except for the part where he claimed to be unconscious. Julian and Carolyn was sent to stay in the hospital and then with their relatives, but law enforcement officers had no time to rest. Despite the miraculous rescue of the kidnapping victims, the armed forces still faced a real threat that the dangerous organization responsible for the kidnapping would continue its destructive activities. It had to be stopped at any cost. Before bloodshed could begin, the police decided to go to the place from which the prisoners had escaped. They found cut pieces of duct tape, clothing, a shovel, and other items, all of which were checked. To the detectives' amazement, some items belonged to Julian, including a rope found in his house's barn. There was also disturbed earth that had been dug up. The detectives discovered a balaclava, black clothing, gloves, and other things described by Carolyn. From that moment, Julian's story became even more disturbing. In particular, Julian was never able to show any signs of the head injuries he claimed to have sustained. Any such injuries should have remained visible, especially if Julian had indeed delivered a blow that could have knocked him out for several hours. They decided to talk to Julian again. From the start, the detectives made it clear that they had good reason to suspect him of kidnapping. Julian was nervous but insisted on his story, referring to his beloved, who confirmed much of what he said. However, within a few hours, he was brought to justice. Julian admitted that he had organized the kidnapping himself. He had bought the items he intended to use for the kidnapping in advance, taking some from home, including items that allowed him to hide his face from Carolyn. He had even trained for some time to tie knots that would not injure when immobilizing someone. The cult symbols used in the letters were meant to scare his parents and Carolyn's relatives into not contacting the police, preventing detective intervention. Julian deliberately used foul language in the letters he sent to the Buchwald and Watson families. No one thought he would say such words. Julian had deliberately chosen the longest route to the waterfall to avoid detection and confuse the tracks. The guy kept a lookout for anything suspicious that could attract attention and give him the opportunity to implement his plan. He eventually noticed an animal carcass on the side of the road and decided it was time to act. Julian stopped around a corner to hide from Carolyn's sight, changed his clothes, and returned to the car to play out the rest. The place he had chosen to take Carolyn was far away, allowing them to stay away from people. According to him, when Carolyn heard sounds of earth being dug up, he was actually not making a grave but getting rid of evidence. After that, he got into the car and drove away to hide it in the woods, then he returned to Carolyn. Along the way, he got rid of his clothes and wrapped ropes around his hands to make himself look like a kidnapped person. After that, he began to call her name in a weak voice, pretending that he had just regained consciousness after a blow to the head. The kidnapping was carefully planned. He had items that helped they survive this difficult period. Even the fact that they returned to the place from which they had escaped was part of the plan. However, one aspect still remained unclear. Why stage such a spectacle? 22-year-old Julian admitted that he wanted to marry Carolyn immediately. They had already been dating for 2 years, but she did not agree. 17-year-old Carolyn planned to finish school, decide on her future, go to college, get a job, become independent before finally tying the knot and starting a family. At the same time, both were devout Christians who believed in abstaining from intimate before marriage. He did not want to wait so long. He desperately wanted to satisfy his intimate desires, so he staged the kidnapping. He specifically planned everything so that they would both be isolated during their wandering through the dense thickets. Julian tried various tactics to persuade his girlfriend to be intimate. He reasoned that they might not survive this adventure, and it was worth trying intimate. He also convinced Carolyn that in the face of death, they had entered into an alliance in the fight for their lives, which he equated with marriage. Julian even tried to persuade her that they needed to engage in intimate intercourse to keep warm at night, claiming he had read about such a method somewhere. Carolyn was unwavering, continued to refuse, and insisted on her beliefs, convinced that God would save them. Therefore, his plan ultimately failed. Among the items Julian had prepared for the trip, there was a map of the national park. They had not actually gotten lost when Julian realized Carolyn was not going to give up. Therefore, he decided to lead them out of this national park. After Julian's confession, he was slapped by Carolyn, charged with kidnapping and perjury. The trial was scheduled for August 2009. Julian was not held in jail after the trial because his wealthy family posted bail. Julian took advantage of the situation and made another attempt to escape punishment. In September 2009, he obtained an Indian passport, boarded a plane, and flew to China. The document was obviously fake but of sufficient quality to fool Australian security services. Julian dyed his hair black and spent a long time sunbathing to darken his skin as much as possible, even though he was fair-skinned and required many tanning sessions. Although he managed to fly out of Australia, the Indian security services were more vigilant and refused to let him enter the country. Julian was arrested in Singapore. It was assumed that India was only the first stop on his journey and that Germany was intended to be his final destination. After that, he received a sentence of 7 years and 3 months for kidnapping, as well as an additional 6 months for escaping. He tried to challenge the court's decision, arguing that it was too harsh, but could not contest the fact that the kidnapping in this incident was a significant issue. In another unexpected turn of events, it was revealed that Julian was originally from Germany. His family had moved to Australia at an early age. In 2014, the Immigration Service considered the possibility of canceling his visa. Julian tried to resist this decision but failed. In 2016, he was deported to Germany, ending up in a country where he did not know the language at all. There were no relatives or acquaintances with whom he could start anew. His further fate is not reliably known, and there is no information about whether he went to prison. According to some sources, Julian's situation has worsened. On the other hand, Carolyn could not come to her senses for a long time after such a betrayal. It was difficult for her to learn to trust people, especially men. What happened in her life afterward is unknown. Jonathan Candy was a 42-year-old engineer working with the Oklahoma City basketball team. He focused on equipment maintenance and had developed his career over many years, first in sports and then in technical fields, which allowed him to support his family comfortably. In 2024, he had been married for 10 years to his wife, Lindsay Candy, who was 39. They lived in Yukon, Oklahoma, a small, quiet suburb with a population of over 20,000. They had 4 children, Dylan, 18, Ethan, 14, Lucas, 12, and their youngest child, who was just 10. The identity of the 10-year-old was kept private due to his young age and vulnerability. In the spring of 2024, this 10-year-old boy is about to experience a tragic event, an event that will greatly impact his life and those around him. The Candy family was viewed as a model American family, friendly and tight-knit. They have built a strong influence in the community, raising their children in one of the safest and most beautiful suburbs of the state. At that time, Ethan and Lucas were in school, in the 9th and 6th grades, respectively. Meanwhile, Dylan had graduated from high school in 2023 and was preparing for adulthood. He planned to attend college and had found a job to save money while applying to various schools. The Candy family did not have any mental health issues. Their upbringing was stable and uneventful. There were no instances of running away from home, and the parents maintained a peaceful household, allowing their children the freedom to make choices. This environment contributed to a thriving atmosphere at home, where the kids grew up feeling strong, sociable, and loved. They were always supportive of each other and even appeared in a local bakery advertisement, where they were regular customers and shared their favorite meals. Jonathan and Lindsay worked hard to help their children prepare for the future and lead fulfilling lives. However, behind this seemingly happy facade, a terrible situation is unfolding that will create a nightmare on Willow Street. On the evening of April 21, 2024, a Sunday, the whole family gathered at home. The older children spent time with their friends but returned home early to prepare for school the next day and to go to bed on time. Everything seemed normal for the Candy family, and no one anticipated the shocking incident that was about to occur. After dinner, Jonathan went to bed, and each child settled into their own room on the second floor. Later that night, the children overheard Jonathan and Lindsay arguing in the living room on the first floor. Although the specifics of their argument were unclear, it escalated dangerously. Despite the tension, everyone remained calm and went to bed. The youngest boy, whose fan was running, could hardly hear the commotion below. Meanwhile, a tragedy unfolded on the first floor that resulted in the deaths of 5 family members. But what exactly happened, and who was responsible for this horrific crime? In conversations with the only surviving family member, more details emerged after the incident. The fire alarm went off, which forensic experts determined was caused by gunpowder fumes from the shooting. The noise startled the youngest child, who didn't understand what was happening or why the alarm was sounding. Curious, he left his room to investigate, completely unprepared for the horrific scene he was about to encounter. As he stepped into the hallway, he noticed that the doors to his brother's rooms were open. Ordinarily, this might have seemed odd, but he thought everyone had gotten up due to the alarm. He made his way downstairs to the first floor and noticed a light on. He called out for his parents but received no answer. He then called his brothers, but all he got was the continuous beeping of the warning. Hoping to find answers, the boy went to the living room. The first thing he saw was blood splattered on the walls and furniture. In the center of the room lay his mother and father in large pools of blood. His father was sprawled on top of his mother, having suffered a gunshot wound to the head. The boy was terrified and in shock. He rushed to his father, trying to wake him up, not fully grasping what had happened. He saw the bullet holes and felt his parents grow cold, but he refused to believe they were dead. Despite shaking his father repeatedly, there were no signs of life. His mother did not respond either. In a moment of desperation, he called out for his brothers, still unaware that he was the only survivor. Overwhelmed with grief, he cried and collapsed onto his parents' lifeless bodies. He then walked through his brother's room and saw an identical, horrifying scene. Blood was everywhere, and there were no signs of life. Eventually, he realized he needed to call for help. Summoning his courage, he reached out to a rescue worker and requested assistance. This initiated a horrifying sequence of incidents that would lead to a deeper investigation into this unimaginable tragedy. When law enforcement and paramedics arrived, they quickly realized that nothing could be done. The family had been dead for several hours, as indicated by the rigor mortis and the state of the blood on the floor. The parents and older brothers were declared dead at the scene, and the house was cordoned off for investigation. Forensic experts and detectives, horrified, began to reconstruct the scene of the brutal massacre. The idea of an outsider attacking the family was quickly dismissed, as there were no signs of forced entry or any outsiders present. This raised concerns that the murders had been committed by a family member. At some point, the 10-year-old boy was found to be covered in blood, leading police to consider whether he might have been involved. However, his behavior, condition, age, and the evidence quickly eliminated any doubt. There were no traces of gunpowder on his hands, and no fingerprints on the weapon. Forensic experts thoroughly examined the windows and doors and found no signs of staging. Everything in the house was intact, with no valuables disturbed or missing. They reviewed street surveillance footage and only saw the family members returning from the store that evening, no one else had entered or left the house before the police's arrival. The boy mentioned hearing his parents scream before he fell asleep. Since the weapon was found next to the body of Jonathan, the boy's father, it was clear that the father had committed a crime against his family before harming himself. As investigators analyzed the crime scene, it became evident how ruthless and cold-blooded 42-year-old Jonathan had been. The motive behind his actions remained unclear. The police could not determine the cause of the conflict, as no suicide notes were found in the house. They needed to analyze the mobile phones and computers of all family members, which were seized immediately, hoping to uncover new information. However, a complete analysis would take time. It remains a puzzling question why a loving father, who seems to be a good family man, would kill his wife and children but spare his youngest son. The weapon used in the crime was taken for examination, confirming that all members of Candy's family, including Jonathan, were shot with the same gun. Only Jonathan's fingerprints were found on the handle, ruling out the involvement of anyone else in the attack. Notably, none of the victims, including Lindsay, showed any signs of defensive injuries, suggesting that Jonathan's violent outburst was completely unexpected and uncontrollable, leaving no one time to react or defend themselves. Lindsay, who did not die instantly, bled on the living room floor while Jonathan, upstairs, methodically killed their sleeping children. It is believed that Lindsay heard the commotion but was powerless to intervene. Detectives considered the incident to be highly unusual. Friends and relatives found it hard to believe that a devoted father and loving husband like Jonathan could commit such an atrocity. He had no criminal record, and police had never been called to their home for domestic disturbances. Initially, investigators considered other possibilities, such as robbery or an attack by a stranger, but none of these theories added up. The family was well-liked and had no enemies, and Jonathan seemed incapable of such violence. Investigations cleared Jonathan of any doubts regarding his innocence. Officers interviewed relatives and neighbors to find potential explanations for the tragedy. Those close to the family described them as friendly and problem-free, with Jonathan being a respected community member who avoided criminal behavior. His service record was impeccable, and he was seen as calm and non-confrontational. The suddenness of the incident deeply shocked his relatives, as there had been no warning signs leading up to it. While some considered Jonathan a psychopath, they acknowledged that although disagreements between him and his wife occurred occasionally, they were rare and never involved violence. People struggled to accept his guilt, and as police statements regarding the investigation emerged, confusion set in. The community sought answers to the questions raised by the media, eagerly seeking clarity amidst the turmoil. On the day of the tragedy, Candy's family did not reach out to relatives or friends. They spent time together just once, going to the store for groceries, after which the older children left home to meet their friends. Nevertheless, they all reunited in the evening. The youngest child was unaware of any issues. It felt like a regular day. Jonathan remained calm and did not show any signs of anger. An alarming piece of information came from Michael Buru, a neighbor of the Andy family, who revealed that Jonathan had often helped him with construction and household tasks before the tragedy. They maintained a close relationship and even talked about personal matters. Michael mentioned that Jonathan once confided in him about his struggles, admitting he was dealing with depression and was taking medication prescribed by a doctor. However, Jonathan suggested that he had overcome his illness and that his depression had improved. He claimed to feel fine and had no lingering negativity toward his spouse, attributing his previous unhappiness to his mental state. After that conversation, no one heard him mention a relapse. There were no incidents indicating a return of his depressive symptoms. Investigators reviewed Jonathan's medical records but found nothing new. He had not sought help from psychiatrists or psychologists in recent times. If there had been any changes in Jonathan's condition, they would likely have been noticeable in his behavior. However, the investigation hit a dead end because no one reported anything suspicious. Some family members were aware of Jonathan's past depression, which had been resolved years ago, but they expressed no concern about his current state. Jonathan's mother mentioned that he had quickly overcome his illness and that his depression had not negatively impacted family relationships. Rather, his wife had supported him throughout. people close to Candy's family did not perceive Jonathan's struggles as serious. After overcoming his depression, he seemed to be part of a normal, happy family. The detectives found no additional leads. Was it possible that Jonathan experienced a resurgence of depression? If so, was he keeping it hidden? This was the only potential explanation for what had happened and could provide a motive. However, psychiatrists noted that it would be very difficult to hide such a condition given their active social life. Lindsay and Jonathan regularly spent time with their children, enjoying a vibrant lifestyle filled with barbecues and social gatherings. Their last barbecue event took place on Saturday, April 20th, at Michael's house, where neither Jonathan nor his wife displayed any signs of conflict. What occurred in their home did not align with the existing narrative. More information was needed, but it was lacking. There was hope that insights from mobile phones and computers could reveal important clues. There was a suspicion that jealousy might have played a role in the murder. However, even this line of investigation yielded little. The initial examination revealed no significant findings. Jonathan and his wife communicated regularly on social media, but their conversations appeared to be friendly, without any signs of intrigue or infidelity. Consequently, any theories about betrayal had to be set aside until a thorough analysis of their correspondence could be conducted. Additionally, Lindsay and Jonathan conducted routine searches online, but nothing concerning emerged. The main witness for the police in the case was a 10-year-old boy who, for unknown reasons, had been taken in by his maternal relatives. Many compassionate individuals wanted to help him deal with his trauma, leading to the creation of a fund aimed at raising $100,000 for his support. By the fall of 2024, the fund had already collected over $74,000, and donations were still pouring in. During the spring, the boy attracted attention not only from those offering emotional and financial support but also from law enforcement officers conducting investigations. The police did not speak to him immediately, recognizing that he was in shock and struggling to cope with his traumatic experience. Despite his young age, he was very aware of the horrific event that had claimed the lives of his loved ones. Initially, the boy had trouble sleeping, often waking up screaming and in tears. Multiple psychologists worked with him after he once expressed that he did not want to live. His relatives rallied around him, helping to ease the effects of his severe trauma, but he still faced many challenges ahead. Experts concluded that the boy could meet with the police to provide them with important information, so a child psychologist was brought in to ensure he felt safe and comfortable during the conversation. The psychologist collaborated with investigators to create a list of topics that would be least traumatic for the child. However, despite their efforts, what the boy shared mirrored what others familiar with his family had reported. He struggled to understand why his father had committed such a violent act. He recalled hearing his parents arguing before bedtime, but he could not comprehend the details. A fan was running in the room, drowning out the sounds of the argument, and eventually, he fell asleep, unaware of the tragedy that was unfolding. The boy also confirmed that Jonathan was never cruel or aggressive. He had never hurt his children nor his wife, Lindsay. Detectives wanted to know why no one else reacted to the shooting that began inside the house. The other children must have heard their mother's screams, yet they were fast asleep and were shot during the night. It seemed as though fate was on the side of evil. Jonathan used a small-caliber pistol, which is relatively quiet, and forensic experts suggested this might explain why neighbors didn't notice anything during such a quiet time of day. However, it was puzzling that none of the children in the house woke up or heard anything until it was too late. The younger child mentioned that fans were running in every room, which might have muffled the sounds of the shots. Despite the police's efforts, they could not gather new information from the child. The detectives had to ask him some uncomfortable questions regarding the incident, the positions of the bodies, and the bloodshed. Eventually, the boy became anxious and began to cry. The child psychologist decided to halt the questioning to prevent further distress for the boy, leaving the detectives without any new leads. Relatives reported that after meeting with the police, the boy became even more anxious. Psychologists were worried about how to help him deal with this new trauma, as he had just begun to recover from his previous experiences. The police's questioning raised feelings of fear, despair, and helplessness once again. Consequently, they decided not to push him further and to avoid drawing media attention to him. Journalists, being less sensitive, made it more challenging for the boy to maintain his privacy. However, through collective efforts, they managed to secure confidentiality for him. Despite the presence of an expert during the police interview with the boy, it appeared to have a detrimental effect on him. During this time, he stayed with his aunt, who became his official guardian. It is expected that once the fund raises enough money, she will receive financial support to help her nephew address his mental health issues. He continues to suffer from frequent panic attacks, disrupted sleep, and nightmares that have not improved. His aunt believes that the funds should not only cover rehabilitation but also ensure that he can pursue an education and rebuild his life. While this support may seem like a weak consolation and cannot bring back his loved ones, he must navigate a long and challenging recovery with the help of those close to him. Investigators were able to reconstruct the events surrounding the tragedy. It began after an argument between Jonathan and Lindsay escalated, leading him to grab a weapon. He first shot his wife, Lindsay, severely injuring her. She fell to the floor, bleeding but still alive. Jonathan, still armed, was consumed by rage as he entered the children's rooms. He encountered his 18-year-old son, Dylan, and attacked him on the head without hesitation. Dylan was using earplugs, likely to avoid being disturbed by the argument. It's possible that had he not been wearing them, the outcome might have been different. The fatal shot instantly claimed Dylan's life. Jonathan then moved to Ethan's room, where he also attacked his child on the head. The same tragic fate befell his 12-year-old son, Lucas. Only the youngest son, who is 10 years old, survived. The reasons for this remain unclear. Perhaps the father felt pity for the youngest, or he miscalculated and mistakenly overlooked his room. Jonathan went downstairs and returned to the living room. It seemed he understood what had happened, so he ended his life. On April 23rd, a group made up of people who cared for the family and the surviving child came to pay their respects. 39-year-old Lindsay was remembered as a devoted mother and loving wife. As a housewife, she did everything she could to ensure her children were comfortable. 18-year-old Dylan was described as a kind young man who supported his family and was always there for his loved ones. Intelligent and strong, he was a source of support for his friends. The family and friends are heartbroken by this tremendous loss. The youngest victim, 12-year-old Lucas, was unaware that the real threat to his life came from someone close to him. Jonathan will be remembered as a good father and husband, recognized for his ability to uplift spirits and make others laugh. Many struggled to believe that he could commit such an act. Although they acknowledged the evidence against him, they speculated that he was in a state of altered consciousness or psychosis that he couldn't control. At the last press conference, the detectives reported that there can be no doubt that the killer of the Candy family was Jonathan. However, by this time, there was no other information. The only thing the forensic scientist managed to achieve was to cross out any other suspects from the list. Unfortunately, even after several months, nothing new was found out, and the exact reason for the attack remains unknown. Sofia Maria Martinez was born on November 14, 1981, in El Paso, Texas. Her parents, Juan and Maria, immigrated from Mexico in the late 1970s in search of a better life. They worked multiple jobs to support their daughters. She grew up alongside her two sisters, her older sister Dulce and her younger sister Marianne. Since a young age, they have shared a close bond. When Sofia was 12, family tensions arose, and her parents divorced in 1995. Three sisters live with their mother, who later remarried a successful man named Iladio and had two sons with him. Meanwhile, Juan began a new family, leading to reduced contact with his daughters from his first marriage. Despite this, Sofia did not hold any resentment toward her father and developed a good relationship with her stepfather. Sofia grew up to be kind, outgoing, and compassionate, often helping her mother with the younger children and providing them with support. She had a particularly strong bond with her younger sister, and they were best friends. At 15, Sofia took a part-time job as a sales associate at a local mall, saving money diligently over the years. She dreamed of owning a bright red Pontiac. Knowing about her dream, her mother and stepfather gifted her the remaining amount she needed to buy the car when she turned 18. In November 1999, Sophia proudly drove her brand new car off the dealership lot, a vehicle she had long admired. She took great care of it, keeping it clean inside and out, and drove it carefully. The car was a source of pride for her, and she never allowed anyone else to drive it. By the year 2000, Sophia was preparing for her graduation and was excited about the upcoming senior prom. She carefully selected the perfect dress, shoes, and accessories for the big night. Weekends were spent shopping with her sister, trying on outfits, planning hairstyles, and choosing makeup. In February, the senior yearbook photos were taken, capturing students in their graduation caps and gowns, and Sophia was filled with joy, eager to start college. She planned to pursue a history major at the prestigious University of Texas, with the ambition of becoming a teacher. Unfortunately, Sophia's dreams would never be realized. Although she had many friends, she had never been in a serious relationship. She focused on her schoolwork and job rather than dating. While she sometimes accepted invitations from boys interested in her, none of those dates turned into anything significant. In early March, her co-worker Justin suggested setting her up on a blind date with a friend of his. After some initial hesitation, she agreed, and they planned to meet on the evening of Friday, March 10th. They decided to go to a popular nightclub that allowed entry to those 18 and older, unlike most places that required patrons to be 21. On the evening of March 10, 2000, Sophia hurried home from school, excited to prepare for her blind date. She tried on at least 10 different outfits, stepping out each time for her family's feedback. Ultimately, they all agreed she looked stunning in a bright red evening dress that flattered her figure while remaining elegant and modest. She applied her makeup, styled her hair in soft curls, put on a pair of heels, and carried a small clutch bag. The final touch was her favorite perfume. By 10 p.m., she was completely ready. She entered the living room looking glamorous and twirled to show off her outfit. Her family was impressed, confident that she would make a great impression. She promised to be home no later than 2 a.m. since she had a work shift at the mall the next day, and no one was particularly worried. She was responsible and always kept her promises. At 10:10 p.m., Sophia left the house with a bright smile, climbed into her beloved red Pontiac, and waved goodbye to her family as they watched from the window. None of them could have imagined that it would be the last time they saw her alive. The following morning, her younger sister Mary peeked into her room and noticed something odd. She was missing, and her bed was not just neatly made, it looked untouched. It seemed she had left for work, yet her employee badge sat on the vanity, and her usual work shoes were in the corner by the closet. Mary informed her mother, and at that moment, the phone rang. It was a call from Sophia's employer, reporting that she hadn't shown up for her shift, something unprecedented. This alarmed Sophia's family, who were unsure about what to do next. Since she didn't have a cell phone, her family started calling the landlines of her friends, classmates, and co-workers. Unfortunately, no one had seen her since the previous night, and they did not know how to contact the boys she was with. They also reached out to local hospitals, worried that she might have been in an accident. By the evening, without any updates on her whereabouts, the family decided to go to the police to report her missing. They took a recent photo of her and provided a detailed description of her outfit when she left home, as well as specific information about the car she was driving. On Saturday, March 11th, police made a disturbing discovery in the New Mexico desert. They found an abandoned red Pontiac about 100 yards off the highway connecting Texas and New Mexico. The passenger side window had a bullet hole, and there were dark, dried stains resembling blood on the seat, steering wheel, and headrest. Experienced officers quickly suspected foul play and feared that the driver might be seriously injured or worse. The car was sent to a forensic lab for analysis. However, since the discovery occurred in a different state, law enforcement struggled to find a direct connection to Sophia. After checking the car's registration, authorities confirmed that the red Pontiac belonged to Maria Martinez from Texas. They contacted her to see if the car had been stolen and to find out that it had been driven by her daughter, Sophia, who had been reported missing the previous day. The family was baffled as to how Sophia's car ended up abandoned in a desert in a neighboring state and where she might be. Maria emphasized that her daughter cherished her car and would never have left it behind, suggesting that something terrible must have happened. One theory was that the vehicle had been hijacked and that Sophia might have been harmed, but there was still hope that she could be found alive. However, with no leads in sight, law enforcement was unsure where to begin their search. On Sunday, March 12, a group of teenagers walking near the outskirts of El Paso spotted something shiny in the desert and decided to investigate. As they got closer, they found the lifeless body of a young woman in a red evening dress. They hurried home to tell their parents, who called the police. Forensic investigators arrived at the scene within an hour. Officers discovered the young woman lying on her back, her face so disfigured that she was unidentifiable. Her dress was soaked in blood and covered with sand. Although no identification was found, police believed they had discovered the body of a girl named Sophia, who had been reported missing 2 days earlier. When Sophia's family was informed that a body had been found in the desert, her mother, Maria, refused to accept it, convinced that there had been a mistake and that her daughter was still alive. Her doubts disappeared when detectives showed her a photograph taken from the victim's bra. The picture showed Sophia holding her youngest brother, which confirmed her identity, as it was known that Sophia often carried photos of her siblings in her wallet. In her final moments, she had placed one close to her heart. The autopsy revealed that she had died from multiple gunshot wounds to the head, having been shot 5 times in the face. One bullet traveled through her head and was later found in the sand at the crime scene. The severity of her injuries left her with no chance of survival. Additionally, there were clear signs of a struggle, including severe bruising and indications of physical violence. The inner surfaces of her thighs were bruised and scratched, and forensic examinations confirmed internal injuries consistent with an assault. DNA analysis also provided biological evidence, and defensive wounds on her hands indicated that she had fought fiercely for her life but ultimately was overpowered. None of Sophia's personal belongings were found, except for a photograph she had hidden in her clothing. Due to the severity of her injuries, her identity could only be confirmed through DNA testing, as even dental records proved ineffective. Toxicology reports later revealed that there were no substances in her system at the time of death. Investigators discovered several shoe prints near the body. While most were unclear, one distinct impression helped forensic analysts identify the size and tread pattern of the sole. Authorities found only Sophia's fingerprints inside her car. Although her purse was recovered from the vehicle, the perpetrator had taken her license, keys, and cash. Her family was advised to change their locks and install a security system because the killer had access to her home address from her ID and had her keys. Her family followed these recommendations but lived in constant fear that the person responsible for her death might target someone else. DNA samples from the biological evidence left by the attacker were uploaded into the National Criminal Database, but no matches were found. This indicated that the suspect likely had no prior criminal record, complicating the investigation. Authorities also considered the possibility that the suspect was a transient who had crossed illegally from Mexico, committed the crime, and then fled back, making him even harder to track. A crucial lead emerged when investigators learned that Sophia had gone on a blind date the night she disappeared, arranged by a coworker. They sought to question both men involved. Since her family did not have their contact information, officers visited her workplace at the mall. Justin, the coworker who set up the date, was on shift that day and agreed to go to the station for questioning. The second man, Marcus, was also interviewed. During the interview, Justin explained that he had planned to meet Sophia at the club, but she never arrived. He and Marcus waited for her until around midnight before they left. He only learned that Sophia was missing the next day when she didn't show up for work. Both Justin and Marcus took polygraph tests to verify their statements, provided DNA samples, and turned over the shoes they wore that night. The results showed no connection to the crime, and their alibis were strong, as many people had seen them at the club. During a closer examination of Sophia's car, officers discovered a crumpled ATM receipt that had slipped under the driver's seat. The receipt indicated that at 10:23 p.m., she had withdrawn $20 from an ATM located just a few blocks from her residence. This detail became a crucial lead, as the ATM and nearby buildings had surveillance cameras. Investigators reviewed the footage from all available cameras and were shocked by what they found. The crime had been recorded from multiple angles, which helped them understand the sequence of events. At 10:22 p.m., a red Pontiac arrived at the ATM. The driver's side window was rolled down, and a young woman was seen withdrawing $20 from her account. The footage clearly showed that she was alone in the car. After taking the cash, Sophia paused for a moment to apply lipstick using her compact mirror. At that point, a figure dressed entirely in black, with a hood obscuring his face, crept up behind her car. She did not see him until he reached her window. Without warning, he pulled out a gun and attacked her in the head. His intention was not to kill her but to intimidate. The bullet grazed her cheek, clipped her nose, and exited from the passenger side window. Shortly afterward, despite her injury and holding a tissue to her bleeding face, Sophia withdrew another $200 from her account. The car then began to drive away from the ATM with the assailant now inside, holding a gun to the back of her head. Within seconds, the vehicle was out of view of the camera, and what happened next is unknown. It's essential to note that this took place in the early 2000s, a time when surveillance camera quality was not very advanced. The footage was grainy and lacked detail, making it impossible to produce a composite sketch of the suspect. All that could be discerned was that the attacker was a white male of average height with a slim build, possibly sporting facial hair. This information, along with video clips of the attack, was shared on local television to alert residents of the danger and encourage anyone who recognized the suspect to come forward. The investigation was lengthy and frustrating. After a news segment aired, police received numerous calls, but none of them provided useful information. As time passed, the investigation slowed, no new evidence surfaced, leaving authorities with more questions than answers. At the end of March, a man contacted the police, stating that he had found a driver's license near the spot where Sophia's body had been discovered 2 weeks earlier. The license belonged to a local woman, raising concerns that she might also have been a victim. However, when the police reached out to her, they learned she was safe and had not been harmed. She explained that her purse had been stolen earlier that month at a mall, where Sophia had also worked. Investigators believed the suspect could have been stalking potential victims and shared this warning with the media to alert other women. The very next day, a young man came forward, admitting to stealing the purse. He panicked after seeing the news and worried that police might link him to a crime he hadn't committed. He willingly provided a DNA sample and was cleared as a suspect in Sophia's case. By July 2000, the investigation had hit a dead end. To help generate new leads, authorities announced a $10,000 reward for information leading to the capture of the killer. Shortly after, Sophia's family launched a fundraising campaign to increase the reward amount, garnering support from friends, concerned citizens, and local organizations. By August, the reward for information had risen to $55,000. However, 6 months had passed since the tragedy, and no new leads had surfaced. Then, on September 30, 2000, a young woman named Heather Napa called the police, claiming she knew who was responsible for Sophia's death and wanted to share information in exchange for the reward money. Although there had been many false tips before, Heather claimed to have physical evidence. Heather, a 20-year-old mother of 2, alleged that her boyfriend, Michael Jacques, and their friend, William Berkeley, were involved in the crime. To support her claims, she provided a charred driver's license that belonged to Sofia Martinez. She explained that she had been afraid to come forward sooner due to fear of retaliation, but with Michael recently jailed and having no means to support her children, she decided to speak up for both the investigation and the reward. At that time, Heather was hospitalized for kidney issues, while Michael and William were both unemployed and struggling financially. On March 10th, William visited her in the hospital and pulled Michael aside for a private conversation. Heather overheard parts of their discussion and realized they were planning something illegal, which she assumed was related to their previous dealings with banned substances. She didn't probe for further details. Shortly afterward, They left, taking a box of latex gloves from a medical supply cabinet. Later that night, around 11 p.m., Michael returned to Heather's hospital room and claimed they had obtained some money. He said he had hidden near an ATM and signaled to William when a single driver approached. After the driver withdrew cash, William allegedly threatened her with a gun, took the money, and ordered her to get out of the car before driving away. Detectives were aware that this account did not match the actual crime, but they allowed Heather to continue. After midnight, a nurse informed Michael that William was waiting for him downstairs. They then left in separate cars, drove to a neighboring state, abandoned the Pontiac in the desert, and returned home in Michael's car. The next day, Heather was released from the hospital and felt anxious about whether the victim would report the crime. To reassure her, William showed her Sophia's driver's license, which noted down Sophia's home address. He casually mentioned that they could intimidate the victim into silence if necessary. Then, without hesitation, he threw the license into a smoldering grill and watched it melt before going to bed. A few days later, Heather watched a news report about Sophia's case and had a realization. She recognized William from the ATM surveillance footage and understood why he had altered his appearance by shaving off his beard and head. When she asked Michael about his involvement, he told her to keep quiet. Heather retrieved the burned license plate from the grill and hid it. She also noticed that Michael had a set of car keys with a Pontiac keychain, although she was unsure of what had happened to them. In August, William left home, and in September, Michael was arrested for distributing banned substances. By that time, feeling safer, Heather decided to come forward and find a way to earn money by providing information to the police. After Heather's statement, investigators brought in 23-year-old Michael Jacques for questioning. Surprisingly, he acknowledged his involvement and agreed to tell his version of events. He claimed that he had nothing to do with Sophia's death but admitted that he helped William cover it up. Michael explained that he and William were in desperate need of money and planned to rob someone at an ATM. When they saw a young girl in a red Pontiac at the ATM, Michael wanted to call off the robbery. However, William misunderstood his actions as a signal to proceed. Although Michael knew William had a gun, he never thought it would be used. The situation quickly escalated, and before Michael realized what was happening, the car sped away. He waited for about 30 minutes, but when William didn't return, he went back to the hospital to be with Heather. Michael insisted that he didn't know what happened to Sophia afterward and denied any knowledge of the assault or murder. However, he confessed to helping dispose of the car. He later learned more information but chose not to report William, aware that he too would face repercussions. A key piece of evidence, a set of car keys, was later found on the roof of Michael's house, exactly where he had thrown them. William Berkeley, the main suspect in the case, was arrested at his parents' home in early October. At just 20 years old, he had no criminal record, but those who knew him reported a pattern of aggression and cruelty dating back to his school years. He had previously assaulted classmates, former girlfriends, and even his mother, yet none of them had reported these incidents to the police. Despite this violent history, William was a talented artist whose work had been showcased in galleries. During his first interrogation, he admitted to robbing and killing Sophia, claiming he needed the money, but he avoided specifics. He insisted that their encounter was consensual and stated that the shooting was accidental. As interrogations progressed and he understood the seriousness of the accusations, he changed his narrative. He began to portray himself as a victim, claiming he was part of a plan led by Michael. Williams said that Michael had selected the car, believing the owner of a Pontiac would have substantial funds. Unfortunately for them, Sophia only had $220, which they viewed as the price for her life. In the lead-up to the trial, William and Michael tried to shift the blame onto each other, but the evidence presented against William was compelling. Authorities found the murder weapon, a handgun, at his home. His DNA was found on Sophia, and a pair of sneakers matching the footprints at the crime scene were found in his bedroom. On April 7, 2002, William was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to death by lethal injection, which was carried out in the spring of 2010. Throughout the years before his execution, he showed no remorse for his actions. Michael Jacques was also found guilty on November 3, 2002, of conspiracy and evidence tampering, receiving a life sentence with the chance of parole after 40 years. Heather, who had been promised a $55,000 reward, received the money but found no joy in it. She lost custody of her children and, at the age of 35, died from complications related to a chronic kidney condition. Bree Kristen Kuhn was born in May 1987 in the United States and grew up with her parents and her older brother, Eric. The family lived in Pennsylvania until her parents divorced. Following the divorce, Bree and Eric moved to Texas with their mother, whose name has not been disclosed. When Eric entered 9th grade, Bree left Texas to live with their father in New York. At that time, their father was in a new relationship with a woman named Karen. Though Bree and her brother Eric lived apart, they remained close, staying in touch on important occasions. However, their relationship with their mother became strained over time. According to Eric, their mother was physically abusive, and Bree would often defend him. She took on the role of a protector, enduring the abuse herself to keep her brother safe. These traumatic experiences profoundly affected Bree, leading her to struggle with depression and anxiety throughout her adolescence. By the age of 13, she had attempted to end her life. In the face of adversity, Bree focused on her education, attending 2 community colleges. While still young, she enlisted in the U.S. Navy, where she served for 17 years at various naval stations across the country. In 2009, she welcomed her first child, a daughter named Kay, with her then-partner, James. Although their relationship ended, Bree retained custody of Kay, while James was granted weekend visitation rights. She later began a relationship with Colin Turner, a fellow service member in the military. Colin James Turner, born on December 28, 1987, was raised in a close-knit, religious family alongside his parents, Tierva Donald Turner, and his sisters, Nicole and Rebecca. Known for his warmth and strong family values, Colin served in the Marine Corps with a specialization in explosive ordnance disposal. He married Casey Gatzman in 2009, and they had a son that same year. After the separation, custody of the children went to Casey, but Colin remained actively involved in his son's care and life. On May 29, 2016, Colin married Bree, and together they started a family with Bree's daughter, Kay. Colin embraced the role of Kay's father, treating her as his own, which deeply endeared her to his family. In April 2017, Bree and Colin welcomed their son, John Patrick, followed by their daughter, Lonnie, in August 2018. After 14 years of service, Colin retired from the Marines and began studying electrical engineering at Arizona State University. He also managed to balance his studies with his responsibilities as a parent, such as helping Kay with distance learning. By this time, the family had settled in Gulf Breeze, Florida, a community recognized for its safety and family-friendly environment. Despite outward appearances of stability, underlying issues were present in Bree and Colin's relationship. She confided to her brother, Eric, that her relationship with Colin was strained. When Eric visited to help mediate, Colin reportedly joked, both privately and in front of Bree, that they got along because they were both narcissistic psychopaths. Eric also noticed Bree felt burdened as the family's sole financial provider, while Colin focused on his studies and childcare. Although Eric encouraged Bree to leave the relationship, she hesitated. Her concerns include that Colin could use her mental health history and his family's finances to gain a legal advantage in a custody battle. In April 2021, she attempted to end her life by overdosing on pills and alcohol while speaking on the phone with Eric. Panicked, Eric contacted Colin, who was at home with Bree but reportedly did not help her. He ultimately called emergency services, and she was hospitalized in a psychiatric facility for 10 days. A month later, she returned to the facility for another week. During her recovery, Bree attributed much of her emotional distress to job-related stress and accused Colin of interfering with her work, which she said exacerbated her difficulties. However, she never publicly accused him of psychological, physical, or emotional abuse. After her hospitalization, she joined an intensive outpatient program and resumed her career at the Naval Air Station in Pensacola. In her role as an assistant to the command chief, Bree was able to continue her treatment while serving under limited-duty sailor status. In the months leading up to the tragedy, Bree began seeking legal assistance. On Wednesday, September 8, 2021, she reached out to a group of mothers on a messaging app, asking for recommendations for a lawyer. She mentioned that the situation could escalate, as it involved disputes over children and property. At 12:53 p.m. that same day, Bree called 911 to report a domestic dispute with her husband, Colin, and requested police assistance at their home. Within minutes, 2 officers arrived at the scene. Colin, her husband, was calmly sitting in a beach chair at the end of the driveway. He informed the officers that Bree had a shotgun, a pistol in the bedroom, and admitted that he also had a firearm in his truck. Colin emphasized that Bree was the one who had called the police. When the officers asked about her whereabouts, he led one of them to the home's entrance and pointed toward the kitchen. As the officer entered, Bree's young son approached, curiously asking about the officer's equipment. Shortly afterward, Bree appeared, looking visibly frustrated. The police officer explained that they could not intervene immediately unless there were obvious injuries or specific evidence of violence. Bree responded bitterly, sarcastically stating that she would make things clearer next time. The officer attempted to de-escalate the situation, explaining that without a court order or restraining order, they could not prevent Colin from seeing or taking the children, especially since 2 of them were biologically his. When asked if she wanted to file a formal complaint, she declined, saying she just wanted to leave the house with her children. The officer informed her that he would speak to Colin while she gathered her belongings. While the officers were speaking with Colin, Bree began transferring items from Colin's truck to hers. Noticing this, Colin firmly stated that he would not allow her to take the children. He argued that he was their primary caregiver and claimed that he intended to take them to his parents' home in Georgia for a few days to let tensions cool down. He also denied having any intention of keeping the children away from Bree. One of the officers advised Colin that, as long as no violence was involved, parenting disputes were not matters for police intervention. When asked if he wanted to file a formal report, he agreed. The officers retrieved paperwork from their patrol vehicle and provided forms to both parties. When Bree saw her form, she asked what she should do if her husband hit her after they left. The officer advised her to use her phone's camera to document any evidence. The officers then departed. A few hours later, around 5 p.m., there was another 911 call from their home, this time from Colin. When the police arrived again, they found Colin outside, holding the youngest child. He told the officers that Bree was refusing to let him back into the house. She then went outside and tried to take the child from his arms. The officers intervened and asked Bree to go back inside to allow for a calm discussion. After confirming that Colin lived in and co-owned the house, an officer informed him that he had the legal right to enter the property, though they discouraged him from using force. The officer emphasized that Colin's access to the home was a lawful right. Concerned about another confrontation, he requested that the officer accompany him inside. Colin explained that Bree had attempted to take the child into the house, but the child had started screaming, refusing to go in without him. When the officer asked if any physical conflict had occurred, Colin said no, but mentioned that the situation was part of a long-standing dispute that had lasted for years. Bree, on the other hand, told the officers that they were discussing divorce and claimed Colin intended to take the children to Georgia. She further accused him of being physically aggressive, adding that the earlier police visit had failed to protect her. She also alleged that Colin had contacted her superiors at work and possibly made claims of emotional abuse. The officer reiterated to Bree that she could not legally prevent Colin from entering his own home. He suggested they work out a temporary arrangement, such as staying in separate bedrooms and minimizing contact, for the well-being of their children. However, Bree refused, expressing concern that allowing Colin inside could lead to more violence. She again brought up her previous allegations of abuse and expressed fear of being harmed. The officer advised her to document any future incidents, but it was clear Bree was seeking more than just advice. She wanted protection that the current system was not equipped to provide. When the officer suggested that everyone enter the house together, Bree refused. The officer then turned to Colin, who calmly provided the children's information. During the exchange, he mentioned Bree's mental health issues. Police confirmed this and said that he had previously intervened in an incident at their home in March, when Bree attempted to harm herself. Police reminded Colin of the same advice they had previously given him, to remain separated within the home for the safety of everyone involved. He also pointed out that standing outside in the intense heat with a small child amidst biting mosquitoes was unsustainable. Before heading inside again, Colin asked the officer to retrieve his wallet, which Bree had allegedly taken from his vehicle. At the door, Bree met the officer. When asked about the wallet, she denied having it and claimed she had only taken Colin's credit card. The officer reminded her that a wallet is personal property, not something to be shared in marriage, and instructed her to return it if she had taken it. In a calm but firm tone, the officer told Bree she had to allow Colin and their daughter back into the house. Bree agreed, but only on the condition that Colin would not harass her or the children. The officer reassured her that if anything happened, she could call them again. As the officer prepared to leave, he returned to inform Colin that Bree claimed she did not know where the wallet was. Colin just smiled and implied that he would let the matter slide. But in reality, nothing was resolved satisfactorily. Less than 2 hours later, at exactly 6:22 p.m., a third and final 911 call came from their residence. Colin James Turner, just 33 years old, had been fatally shot. The final fatal gunshot rang out while the 911 operator was still on the line. On the porch, officers found Bree, then 34, sitting calmly. As they approached, she spontaneously confessed that she had shot her husband. She was taken into custody without resistance. When asked about the children, she said she had taken them to a neighbor who lived a few houses down. Paramedics checked her over while officers ensured that she was physically stable. When asked if she could breathe properly or needed medical care, she didn't respond, so emergency personnel were instructed to evaluate her. Bree was brought to the police station for questioning. The interrogation was slow, interrupted by long silences and frequent bouts of crying. During the interview, Bree opened up about the state of her marital relationship. She said Colin was the primary caregiver for their children and admitted that she believed she had little chance of winning custody due to her history of mental health struggles. She revealed that Colin had threatened to take the children to Georgia and had physically assaulted her. He had also warned that if she reported him, no one would believe her because of her mental health issues, calling her crazy. Bree confessed that she had removed the batteries from the garage door opener to stop Colin from leaving with the children. She claimed that Colin only pretended to care about her mental health as a way to manipulate her, especially after she decided to file for divorce. She mentioned that she had a legal appointment scheduled for the next day. She also mentioned that she had an appointment with a lawyer scheduled for the next day. When asked what had happened just before the attack, Bree said her memory after the second police visit was hazy. She recalled Colin attempting to enter the house through the garage but failing because the way was blocked. However, she said he then used a side door to enter the house. She claimed she tried to stop him, but her next clear memory was knocking on a neighbor's door. She remembered leaving her children there to ensure their safety before returning home to help her husband. Investigators pressed her for a more comprehensive account, but she could only provide scattered details. She said she returned to the garage and saw blood everywhere. Throughout the questioning, Bree repeatedly asked to call her father. Eventually, she was allowed to make the call, which lasted 18 minutes and consisted mostly of sobbing. Her father tried to comfort her, suggesting she would likely spend the night in jail and urging her to seek help if she felt like harming herself again. He reassured her that things could improve and told her to stay strong and look for hope. Toward the end of the call, Bree asked if her father could take custody of her two youngest children. He didn't give a definitive answer, suggesting instead that they would need to discuss it with Colin's mother. He also advised her to cooperate with a public defender if necessary until a more suitable legal option became available. At the end of the call, Bree painfully confesses, she doesn't know what's worse, knowing that Colin is dead or realizing that she was the one who killed him. A month later, in early October 2021, Bree was indicted by a Santa Rosa County grand jury for first-degree premeditated murder in connection to the death of her husband, Colin. Prosecutors had not yet decided whether to seek life imprisonment or the death penalty. On October 16, Collins' family and friends gathered for a military funeral to honor his 14 years of service in the U.S. Marine Corps. During the ceremony, the American flag symbolizing his service was presented to his eldest son, Brody Turner. The youngest children of his were adopted by his parents, who always strived to love and support him despite enduring an irreparable loss. After 3 years of delays, Bree's long-awaited trial began on Tuesday, September 24, 2024, at the Santa Rosa County Courthouse. Now 37 years old, Bree faced accusations of committing a premeditated and calculated act of murder. The prosecution carefully outlined the events of September 8, 2021, arguing that Bree intentionally killed her husband following a day of escalating conflict. Meanwhile, the defense presented a drastically different narrative, asserting that Bree was a victim of battered woman syndrome. They argued that she had endured years of psychological and emotional abuse from Colin, who had become increasingly unstable after suffering a traumatic brain injury during his military service. The defense maintained that he posed a significant threat to her and their children. Over 4 days, the court heard testimony from various witnesses. The jury and those in the courtroom reviewed full body cam footage from responding officers, which captured their interactions on the day of the incident. The recordings revealed Bree's sarcasm, Colin's calm demeanor, and the chilling 911 call during which gunshots were recorded in real time. Every officer involved testified, including one officer who described the crime scene in detail, recounting the sight of the garage, blood, Colin's body slumped in a chair, and a holstered weapon nearby. A crime scene analyst presented a series of photographs to help jurors visualize where Colin's body was found. Evidence collected included shell casings, bullet fragments, and Colin's phone, which was still connected to the 911 operator, lying beneath him. Prescriptions for Bree's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and mental health treatment were submitted as evidence, along with testimony from her supervisor, Craig Forum, from the Pensacola Naval Station. Craig explained that Bree had been placed on limited duty due to mental health issues. He said that on the day of the shooting, Bree did not show up for work, and Colin called him to inform him that Bree had cut off the family's financial access and damaged the electronics in the house. Colin also told Craig that she had missed therapy sessions and that he was considering moving the children to Georgia. Craig testified that Colin remained calm and spoke in a composed manner throughout the call. He also provided Colin with contact information for a family counselor. Soon after, he spoke to Bree, who accused her husband of lying and being unreasonable in taking the children away. On the trial's second day, forensic pathologist Dr. Diana Oleski was called to testify for the prosecution. Although she did not personally perform Colin's autopsy, she reviewed the results and formed her conclusion. The autopsy revealed that Colin had been shot 4 times, all from behind. The bullets entered between his shoulders and chest. One particularly devastating shot passed through his left shoulder, exited the side of his neck, and lodged in his right wrist. The injuries caused extensive trauma, including punctured lungs, fractured ribs, damage to cervical vertebrae, a ruptured spleen, spinal cord injuries, and damage to the pericardium, the heart's protective membrane. Diana concluded that Colin would have survived for only a few minutes following the pericardial injury. When the defense attorney asked if there was any evidence to indicate that Colin's arm was broken, since he had claimed during the 911 call that Bree had tried to break his arm, Diana responded that there were no signs of injuries consistent with that statement. Eric, Bree's brother, was the next to testify. He recounted a phone conversation with Bree months earlier, on the day she attempted to end her life. During that call, she told him she had taken pills mixed with alcohol. Eric stated that when he informed Colin of this, Colin showed no concern and took no action to help, prompting Eric to step in and call for assistance. Eric also mentioned that Bree had always feared losing her children, believing Colin's family's wealth and legal resources would work against her. On the day of the attack, Eric said Bree was especially anxious because she had an upcoming surgery and feared that Colin would use that time to take the children. He recalled speaking to Bree several times that day, noting her mood alternated between calm and distressed. During their final 45-minute call, Eric said he overheard Bree arguing with Colin, followed by shouting and the sound of objects being thrown. He claimed that Bree had then picked up a weapon. When asked how Eric knew this, he hesitated, saying he believed Bree had told him. Eric begged her to leave with the children, but she didn't listen. The call ended with Bree saying that she was not going to take the kids, followed by the sound of gunshots, crying children, and Bree repeatedly saying that she had killed him and that she needed to call the police. However, Eric's testimony was inconsistent under cross-examination. His account differed from his initial statements to detectives in Pennsylvania. He attributed these contradictions to the claim that his first interview had not been recorded, a claim the detective denied. With that, the prosecution rested its case. The defense initially planned to present Bree's defense through testimony from a mental health expert and Bree herself to explain battered woman syndrome. However, they unexpectedly changed strategy, opting not to present these testimonies and offering no public explanation for their decision. Instead, the defense called James, Bree's ex-husband and the father of her eldest daughter, Kay. James testified about the incident on the day of the shooting. He stated that he exchanged text messages with Colin and later received a phone call from Bree. During the call, Bree had told him that he needed to come get Kay and that she had just shot Colin. When he had asked why, she had responded that she didn't know. James immediately went to pick up his daughter. James also testified in court that he had always thought highly of Colin as a stepfather and that Kay had spoken positively about him. On the third day of the trial, proceedings were interrupted by a hurricane warning, delaying closing arguments until Friday, September 27th. During the prosecution's closing argument, they emphasized that Bree showed no visible injuries on the day of the shooting. They argued that Bree deliberately provoked Colin, secretly filmed the confrontation on her phone, and kept her brother on the line during the incident. They contended that her motive was not self-defense but a desire to assert control. The prosecution concluded that, being unable to provoke aggression from Colin, Bree attacked him 4 times in the back without realizing he was on a 911 call. The defense argued that Colin had been walking around the house with a firearm and suggested he hid the weapon in his truck before police arrived. They referenced Colin's 911 call, where he claimed Bree tried to break his arm, a claim contradicted by the autopsy. One of the defense attorneys mocked Colin's actions during the call, asserting that, as a Marine, he should have handled the situation differently, further implying that his response would have been ridiculed by others in his military unit. The defense ultimately claimed that Bree resorted to attacking Colin because law enforcement had repeatedly failed to protect her despite her pleas for help. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning a guilty verdict. During the sentencing hearing, the judge allowed Colin's parents to speak about the impact of the incident. Colin's mother expressed gratitude for having custody of her grandchildren and stated her intent to adopt them. She condemned Bree not only for taking her son's life but also for attempting to tarnish his reputation. Colin's father spoke of his sadness and disappointment in Bree's actions, sharing that the children were doing well in school and surrounded by love. The judge then sentenced Bree Kristen Kuhn to life in prison. Although the verdict has been announced, the case is not over yet. On October 3, 2024, Bree's legal team filed an appeal with the Florida Court of Appeals, challenging her conviction and requesting a new trial. Meanwhile, Bree was discharged from the U.S. Navy with a general discharge under honorable conditions after 17 years of service, thus avoiding further military disciplinary action. Every day, we encounter the harsher realities of our world, seeing how people can inflict pain on one another in incomprehensible ways. On the night of August 5, 2002, the town of Troop, Texas, was winding down for a quiet evening. Porch lights flickered, families were settling in, and everything seemed normal. Suddenly, a frantic knock echoed through the stillness, coming from a neighbor's door. It was Pastor Michael Tabb, clutching his 2 young children. He looked pale, his hands trembled, and he was clearly out of breath. His voice was filled with urgency. Something was very wrong. Minutes later, the police arrived on the scene. What the officers discovered in the house shocked the investigators. The bedroom was a complete mess, with broken picture frames, overturned furniture, and clear signs of a struggle. In the midst of this chaos, Marla Tabb lay still on the floor. Initially, it appeared to be a failed home invasion, but as the investigators examined the scene more closely, inconsistencies emerged. The image of a loving wife, a respected pastor, and a peaceful town didn't align with the events that had unfolded. What truly happened that night, and who was responsible? Marla Tabb was born on April 25, 1967, in Beaumont, Texas. In those days, her mother took care of the children and managed the household, while her father worked hard to provide for the family as a devoted father. Marla and her sister Melanie grew up in a home rich in music and the arts, which greatly influenced their interests. From a young age, Marla showed a strong passion for music and was eager to hone her skills. By the age of 11, she fully embraced her Christian faith and became actively involved in the Methodist Church, dedicating herself to its social outreach programs and helping spread God's message to various communities, encouraging people to strengthen their faith. During this period, Marla's singing voice started to gain attention. Accompanied by a piano or guitar, her performances resonated deeply with many people. In addition to her talent, Marla's stunning beauty and charismatic personality made a strong impression on everyone she met. Friends described her as kind-hearted and principled, forming deep connections that lasted despite time, distance. She was highly respected and avoided negative influences. Supporting her passion, her encouraging parents helped her pursue formal music education. They enrolled her in a prestigious private university in Texas, where she thrived and gained a richer understanding of her art. Committed to her faith, Marla used her musical talents to contribute to her church. She eventually became the director of music and youth ministry, leading worship with her impressive soprano voice. For 3 seasons, she played a vital role in organizing the church's musical productions throughout Texas. Marla grew up in a household where faith influenced every part of life, and she always dreamed of creating a loving family devoted to God. This dream started to come true when she met Mike Tabb. Mike was born on July 7, 1961, in Texas to Eleanor and Harold Tabb. He was raised alongside his brothers in a family that was very committed to the Methodist Church. When Mike chose to pursue a life in ministry, his family considered it a wonderful blessing. After finishing his studies at a Methodist Christian school, he became a chaplain at a military camp in North Carolina. During this time, Marla was actively involved in her church. Their paths frequently crossed, with her leading the worship music and him preaching the sermons. As they got to know each other better, a strong friendship developed, founded on mutual respect and shared faith. This friendship eventually grew into a loving relationship. As their feelings deepened, Mike decided he wanted to marry Marla. A few months into their relationship, he visited her parents to formally ask for their permission to marry her. With their blessing, he gave Marla an engagement ring, marking the start of their journey toward marriage. In 1998, they were married in the First United Methodist Church, promising to love, respect, and support one another in all situations, guided by their faith. At ages 31 and 37, respectively, Marla and Mike started their married life together at a military camp where Mike continued his pastoral work. He quickly became known as a powerful preacher, capable of touching even the most skeptical. His sermons inspired many to seek God, and he was recognized as a devoted disciple of Christ dedicated to sharing the gospel. Marla, now referred to as Marla Tabb, became his committed partner in ministry. Understanding the responsibilities this role entailed, she wholeheartedly dedicated herself to supporting both him and their mission. 2 years into their marriage, Marla joyfully learned that she was expecting their first child. On April 25, 2000, they welcomed a baby boy named Jonathan, whose birth brought great happiness. Marla focused on raising Jonathan while Mike continued his ministry. However, as Mike's reputation as a preacher grew, so did the demands on his time. He received numerous invitations to speak at churches nationwide, resulting in frequent extended absences from home. As a young mother, Marla struggled with the challenges of his constant travels and yearned for his presence while feeling the pressure of raising their child mostly on her own. Their previously strong bond began to face its first significant challenge. Despite her husband's frequent absences, Marla found some comfort in the military camp where she had formed strong friendships and enjoyed a supportive community. However, she faced a devastating loss when she became pregnant again but unfortunately miscarried shortly after. Balancing the demands of motherhood while dealing with the emotional pain of her loss made it increasingly challenging for Marla to cope with Mike's long absences. Their relationship suffered as disagreements grew, and she wished for him to be more involved. Mike, however, felt that his commitments required him to travel often. Despite their challenges, they tried to repair their relationship, and by 2002, it appeared to be improving when Marla announced her pregnancy with another child. This news briefly brought peace to their home, but their relief was short-lived when Mike unexpectedly learned he was being discharged from military service and reassigned to a civilian position at a Methodist church. With little time to adapt to the unexpected move, he was relocated to a small agricultural town in Texas with a population of just 1,900. The timing was particularly difficult. Marla was close to giving birth, already managing their 2-year-old son, and now had to deal with a sudden relocation. Though she was hesitant, they had to move quickly. The arrival of the new pastor and his family was a big event for the close-knit community. Knowing about Marla's advanced pregnancy, the church women took it upon themselves to prepare the parsonage for the new family. However, Marla struggled to adjust to the upheaval and did not show gratitude as the congregation had hoped, leading to rumors about her being aloof and unapproachable. Adapting to civilian life was quite challenging for them. The move from a structured military ministry to a small-town church, combined with financial pressures and the stress of a growing family, placed further strain on their marriage. Both Marla and Mike felt the intense scrutiny of the congregation, who closely watched their every action. As tensions increased, Marla became the target of town gossip. A particular incident solidified her reputation. In a moment of frustration, she publicly confronted Mike. Her assertiveness was seen as inappropriate. From then on, many labeled her as a controlling wife who mistreated her husband. Marla was increasingly unhappy, began to share her struggles with trusted friends and family. She started to wonder if her current life resembled the Christian home she had once dreamed of. The stress negatively impacted her health, leading to labor complications that required an emergency C-section. On June 25, 2002, she gave birth to a baby boy, David. Now 2 years old, Jonathan was excited to have a little brother to care for. After taking time to recover, Marla tried to reconnect with her community and fulfill her role as the pastor's wife. However, she struggled to adjust to her new life. The hardships from the previous months had left lasting emotional wounds, and the strain in her marriage continued to increase, creating a tense atmosphere at home. Like many couples facing difficulties, they could have either resolved their differences or opted for a friendly separation. However, what unfolded next ended any chance of resolution in an unimaginably tragic way. On the night of August 5, 2002, the police received a 911 call that had been redirected from emergency services. The caller, a neighbor of the Tabb family, reported that Pastor Mike had shown up at their door in distress, carrying his 2 young children and pleading for help. His wife had been violently attacked. Emergency responders, including sheriff's deputies and firefighters, quickly arrived at the parsonage. The scene they encountered was heartbreaking. Marla, who had given birth just 6 weeks earlier, was discovered in her bedroom, still wearing her night clothes. Marla Tabb's badly beaten body was found in a pool of blood. An autopsy would reveal repeated blunt force trauma to her head and face. Her jaw was broken in several places and she appeared to have been strangled. The crime scene was chaotic, with broken picture frames, overturned furniture, and scattered belongings suggesting a violent altercation. Detectives also found a wooden table with a missing leg, which may have been the murder weapon. Investigators began collecting evidence while others interviewed Mike about that evening's events. He stated that he had just come home to find the front door open and his wife lying lifeless on the floor. After checking for a pulse and finding none, he ran to the children's room, took both boys, and went to a neighbor's house for help. While investigators searched for the murder weapon, one of Mike's comments raised eyebrows. Unprompted, he suggested that his wife had been attacked with a baseball bat, which was suspicious since the authorities had not yet identified how she died. Detectives explored several leads, initially thinking it might have been a home invasion that went wrong. However, they quickly ruled that out because nothing valuable was missing. Another theory emerged, suggesting a crime of passion, but there were no clear suspects. Investigators remained open to all possibilities. That night, Mike was asked to take his children somewhere safe. They were temporarily placed with their paternal grandparents. Law enforcement then requested his clothes and shoes for analysis, questioned him about his activities earlier that evening. He claimed he had taken his 2-year-old son to his parents' house, which they later confirmed. In a town where violent crime was extremely rare, the last homicide occurred 5 years ago. News of Marla's brutal death spread quickly, shocking the entire community. Many residents were appalled by the violent nature of the attack, and many sympathized with Mike, who now had the difficult task of raising 2 young children on his own. Marla's funeral was a small, intimate ceremony, during which a fellow minister spoke about her strong faith and commitment to God. Although her death was a heavy loss for her loved ones, the sermon emphasized it as a transition to eternal peace. Mike was visibly heartbroken throughout the service, and his deep sorrow resonated with those present. In the meantime, investigators continued to speak with Marla's acquaintances in hopes of finding leads in the case. A significant breakthrough occurred when they interviewed Melanie. Struggling to hold back tears, she shared that her sister had confided in her just weeks before her death, expressing great concern about her troubled marriage. Marla discovers a surprising flyer for a dance club offering intimate services stuffed in Mike's pocket. When she confronted him about it, he claimed it belonged to a church member he was counseling, but Marla was not convinced by his explanation. As she investigated further, she found a concerning pattern. The trips that Mike often claimed were for church ministry were actually opportunities for him to engage in a secret life that went against his teachings. Investigators pursued this information and discovered 2 separate P.O. boxes, one in Troop, another in North Carolina, where Marla and Michael had once lived. These concealed mailboxes enabled Mike to hide his double life from his family. Authorities were determined to gather clear evidence to support their belief that Marla had been murdered because she planned to divorce Mike and expose his lies. They placed Mike under secret surveillance, suspecting he would soon show his true self, and they were correct. Mike was often seen visiting illegal venues, including escort services and strip clubs, where he drank heavily. Just days after Marla's funeral, he was seen entering a high-end club that catered to celebrities. Forensic tests using luminol found traces of Marla's blood inside the trunk of Mike's car and on his shoes, including the laces. With this undeniable evidence, law enforcement quickly collaborated with the district attorney's office to obtain an arrest warrant. On August 8, 2002, the small town of Troop was shocked when news emerged that their respected First United Methodist pastor had been arrested as the main suspect in his wife's murder. He was released the same day after posting a $50,000 bail. His legal team quickly arranged for a preliminary hearing to take place in mid-August, and they were negotiating a plea deal that would prevent a lengthy trial in exchange for a 50-year prison sentence. However, when the hearing arrived, Mike was missing. Authorities later found out that he had tried to take his own life. His defense lawyers claimed he was hospitalized, while prosecutors argued that this was a ploy to evade justice and called for harsher penalties. According to his family, Mike had been staying at his parents' house before the hearing. He went for a walk one afternoon and did not return. Concerned, his family contacted the authorities, leading to a search. He was eventually found near a lake with a serious stab wound to the neck, requiring nearly 3 hours of emergency surgery. In light of these developments, prosecutors sought to increase his prison sentence from 50 to 55 years, and a judge raised his bail to $1 million. On September 29, 2003, Mike appeared in district court, showing no visible emotion as he formally accepted a plea deal from the prosecution. His defense attorney explained to reporters that they chose to avoid a full trial to spare both families from exposing painful details about the case. The attorney admitted that Mike had taken Marla's life but suggested that the true motive might never be fully understood. He claimed that Mike's main concern was to protect his children from learning about the disturbing circumstances of their mother's death. Unfortunately, that hope was ultimately in vain. The case attracted significant media attention, making it impossible to conceal the tragic details of Marla's murder. Before the judge issued the final sentence, Melanie took the stand to deliver a victim impact statement on behalf of the family. With a trembling voice filled with emotion, she addressed Mike directly, reminding him that he had left his own children orphaned. She demanded that he take responsibility for his actions and stand before the court to admit that he was the one who had taken their mother away from them. The judge issued a final ruling, sentencing Michael Tabb to 55 years in prison for Marla's murder. Prosecutors explained that according to Texas law, he would not be eligible for parole until he served at least 27.5 years. Throughout the trial, Mike stayed silent and showed no emotion. Reports later revealed that he had tried to end his life multiple times while in prison. Despite receiving psychological help, he continued to struggle with his inner turmoil. Analysts suggested that the heavy burden of guilt weighed on him, possibly due to his past as a preacher who once spoke to a congregation about morality and faith. The investigation revealed that Mike served only 20 years of his sentence. He passed away in 2023 and was buried in a Texas cemetery, where his headstone does not mention his date of death. There was no official announcement about the cause of his death. Interestingly, his family listed Marla as his wife in his memorial records, and his tombstone included the phrase "loving son." While Mike may have genuinely been a caring son to his parents, his selfishness ultimately deprived his children of a father they could look up to. More tragically, he took away Marla's opportunity to see her sons grow up, a future she had hoped for as a devoted wife and mother, now lost due to the actions of the person who promised to love, protect her. The murder of Marla Tabb in Troop, Texas, stands as a stark reminder of the hidden fractures that can lie beneath a facade of faith and devotion. Marla, a vibrant mother and talented musician whose life was anchored by her love for God and family, was betrayed in the most unimaginable way by her husband, Michael Tabb, a pastor whose secret life unraveled in a brutal act of violence. The discovery of her battered body in their home shattered the close-knit community, exposing the dissonance between Mike's public persona and his private deceit. His 2003 guilty plea and 55-year sentence, though a step toward justice, could not erase the pain endured by Marla's sister Melanie, her sons Jonathan and David, and a town left grappling with disbelief. Mike's death in 2023, after serving only 20 years, closed a chapter but left unanswered questions about his motives and remorse. Marla's legacy, carried forward by those who cherished her, endures as a testament to her grace and resilience, even as her loss underscores the devastating cost of betrayal and the enduring quest for healing in its aftermath.
On January 27, 2017, Careaga family's peaceful evening in Kitsap County, Washington ended in tragedy when their house caught fire. Upon investigation, authorities discovered 3 bodies inside, all victims of gunshot wounds before the fire was started. 2 days later, another member of the Careaga family was found shot and burned in his truck deep in the woods. This was not a random act. Someone was determined to eliminate this family. But who were they, and what were they trying to conceal? The Careaga family appeared to be a typical close-knit blended family. At the center was John Derek Careaga, 43, recognized by many in the community for his keen business acumen and generous nature. His wife, Christelle Lynn Careaga, 37, brought happiness and warmth to everyone around her. Together, they built a stable home and a successful business. John and Christelle married in 2009, each bringing a son from previous relationships into their new family. 16-year-olds Jonathan Higgins and Hunter Schaap brought laughter, energy, and a touch of typical teenage chaos to their home. They were very close, almost like brothers. Outside of their home, the Careagas were doing well. Christelle operated a popular coffee stand called Christelle's Java Hut, and she and John co-owned Juanito's Taco Shop, a much-loved Mexican restaurant in nearby Bremerton. Their reputation in the local business community was strong. To outsiders, they seemed to be a perfect family, living a happy life. However, underneath this seemingly ideal image, serious issues were developing, issues that went unnoticed by their customers, neighbors, and even their closest friends. It began like any other Friday night. Christelle was hosting friends for what seemed to be a simple, enjoyable gathering. Inside, people chat and relax after a long day. Meanwhile, John was also at home, but his evening changed when he received an urgent phone call. He let his family know he needed to step out briefly to meet someone and promised to return quickly. However, when John returned, he did not come inside. Instead, he remained in the garage. Noticing something was wrong, one of the guests went to check on him. What they overheard was alarming. 3 men were speaking loudly and appeared to be in a heated argument. This unsettling conversation, heard from the darkness of the garage, became the last clue before the night took a tragic turn. As chaos erupted, a frantic call came into Bremerton's emergency dispatch center. On the line was 16-year-old Hunter Shop. Terrified and pleading for help, he explained that he and his family had been shot, urgently requested assistance. However, before he could provide more details, the call abruptly disconnected. What followed was horrifying. In a final act of brutality, Hunter was smothered with a pillow and then shot in the head. When first responders arrived, the flames devoured the Cariaga home, which had once been a place filled with love and life. Inside, they discovered the bodies of Christale, Hunter, Jonathan, 3 lives extinguished in an instant. It was a deliberate, brutal act, and merely a part of a much larger tragedy. 2 days later, a grim discovery was made in a remote area of Mason County, nestled within a quiet tree farm near Belfair. Inside a burned Ford F-150 pickup, the remains of John Cariaga were found. He had been shot, his truck set on fire, and his body left in the woods. A caretaker at the property mentioned something unusual. John had been seen on the land that same day, but he wasn't driving his truck at the time. Combined with details of a conversation John had with 3 men earlier, this raises many questions. Who were the 3 men seen in the garage? The detectives discovered something unexpected. Days after the quadruple murders, more than $50,000 was found in a safe under the master bedroom bed, and $7,000 was found in a bank bag in a closet. Marijuana plants were found in a garage. The killers hadn't taken a single penny, which meant robbery wasn't the motive. Complicating matters further, according to the Kitsap County Fire Marshal's office, firewood, possibly laced with some type of fire accelerant, was placed in beds at opposite ends of the house after Christale, Hunter, and Jonathan were all dead. Large rocks were then thrown through the windows of the house to further fuel the fire, suggesting the goal was to completely destroy the Cariaga family. As investigators looked closer, a darker reality began to unfold. This is when John's double life came to light. This wasn't merely a random act of violence or a disastrous family feud. Law enforcement revealed that while John managed a family business during the day, he secretly engaged in a high-risk operation, smuggling and selling cocaine, allegedly bringing back kilos from California every few months to distribute in Kitsap County. Some of the people buying cocaine from John were members of the Bandidos MC Bremerton chapter. This life may have ultimately led to his family's tragic fate. An important detail was overlooked. A neighbor of the Cariagas heard gunshots at the house on the day of the murder and reported seeing John Cariaga's truck speed away, with Kelly, a friend of John's, at the wheel and another vehicle closely following behind. Nearly a year after the murder, the Kitsap County Sheriff's Office said Danny J. Kelly Jr. has been identified as a suspect. In January 2018, the Sheriff's Office released surveillance images of Kelly in a Target store from more than a week before the murders. In the store, he was seen wearing clothing associated with the Bandidos Motorcycle Club. In January 2020, FBI detectives and agents announced that Kelly and associates of the Bandidos Motorcycle Club were directly involved in the Cariaga family murders. Detectives working with FBI agents developed a chilling theory. This was not an isolated incident, but a targeted hit orchestrated by members and associates of the Bandidos Motorcycle Club. In their world, loyalty is paramount, and betrayal, whether real or imagined, can have deadly consequences. Although the Bandidos claim they are not a criminal organization, the facts suggest otherwise. Members of the club have faced convictions for various crimes. The range of criminal activities associated with them is extensive and alarming, including racketeering, running illegal businesses, banned substance and arms trafficking, assault, money laundering, loan sharking, contract killings, trafficking stolen goods, motor vehicle theft, and counterfeiting. In Washington state, The Bandidos motorcycle gang has 14 chapters, is heavily involved in methamphetamine trafficking and violent crime. In 1985, law enforcement conducted a major operation against the Bandidos, arresting 13 members on banned substance and weapon charges in cities like Bellingham, Everett, and Puyallup. This operation was the result of a 16-month investigation involving the FBI, DEA, and ATF, showcasing the seriousness of law enforcement's efforts to combat their criminal activities. The gang's violent nature is evident from a deadly shootout in 2000 between the Bandidos and a rival gang, the Iron Horsemen, at a motorcycle rally. In this conflict, one Bandidos member was killed, another was injured, and a member of the rival gang suffered critical injuries. This altercation was rooted in a banned substance dispute, indicating that the gang's conflicts frequently escalate into violence. In 2005, the criminal activities of the Bandidos were closely examined when 32 members and associates from Washington and Montana faced serious charges. During subsequent raids, law enforcement seized banned substance, firearms, stolen motorcycles, and a significant amount of cash. Many members, including top leaders like the international president and chapter presidents, pleaded guilty. Although there were convictions, some sentences were unexpectedly lenient, and a few members were permitted to remain associated with the club under strict court oversight. Now, let's focus on John's connection to the club. One of Johnny Carriaga's close friends started selling the cocaine he transported from California to Robert Bobby Watson III, a fully patched member of the Bandidos MC Bremerton chapter. It is unknown whether Watson had purchased the cocaine for his own personal use or to resell and profit off of. The friend of John's eventually decided to put a stop to selling, placing John into direct communication with Bobby Watson III as a subsequent result. When John would end up taking his routine trip down to California after this incident, Watson would follow closely behind him, ultimately causing an intense verbal argument between both men. Whatever took place during that confrontation set off a series of events that led to John's entire family being killed just weeks later. The key question now is, was John the only target, or was this assassination meant to make a statement to others as well? Known as Bobby to his friends, Watson was not just a hot-tempered biker. He was the vice president of the Bandidos Motorcycle Club's Bellingham chapter and, according to police, the suspected planner of the Carriaga family massacre. What made the situation even more frightening was Bobby's behavior after the murders. When other Bandidos members questioned him about his involvement, Bobby gave vague answers, avoided direct questions, and provided conflicting accounts of what happened. It seemed as though he either couldn't keep his story straight or didn't care to. Even though Bobby had a high position in the Bandidos, not all members agreed with the violence that occurred. The chapter president publicly denounced the killings, particularly the horrific murders of women and children. He even worked with investigators, stating that there is a clear line between loyalty to the gang and pure brutality. In the biker community, the rules can be unclear, but murdering an entire family was seen as crossing a serious line, even among criminals. Then there was Johnny James Watson, Bobby's younger brother from Bellingham. Johnny was not a member of the Bandidos and, according to available records, had no direct involvement in the gang's illegal activities. However, being Bobby Watson's brother made him a suspect by default. Questions arose. What did he know? What had he heard? And most importantly, what part, if any, did he play in these events? One of the most heartbreaking aspects of this story involves Danny J. Kelly Jr. Although Kelly was not an official member of the Bandidos, he was very much involved. As a hang-around, he was seen as a prospective member eager to earn his place in the group, with Bobby Watson being his connection to the inner circle. Kelly often wore Bandidos supporter gear and openly expressed his ambitions. However, what makes his story particularly tragic is that years prior, Kelly was among John Carriaga's closest friends. In fact, John chose him to be the best man at his wedding. It was a friendship that should have lasted forever, but things took a wrong turn. Their bond fell apart when John accused Kelly of stealing from him, an accusation that shattered any remaining trust. After years of diligent investigation, the details of the Carriaga family case finally came together, leading law enforcement to establish a special task force dedicated to uncovering the truth behind the brutal quadruple murder. This was not just another forgotten cold case. It became an urgent mission aimed at bringing the perpetrators to justice for the pain they inflicted. The evidence mounted, and eventually 3 men, Danny J. Kelly Jr., Robert Bobby Watson, and Johnny James Watson, who were believed to have planned and carried out the attack, were arrested. Their names, once merely whispered in private conversations, now resonated throughout the Kitsap County Jail. Even while in custody, they maintained their innocence against a long list of serious felony charges, including aggravated murder, arson, and burglary. Each faced the looming threat of 16 felony counts hanging over them like a sword on a thread. A judge, understanding the seriousness of their alleged offenses and the danger they posed, denied bail for all 3. They were also prohibited from having firearms, alcohol, or banned substance unless prescribed for medical reasons. To avoid any potential coordination among them, the court prohibited contact between the men. It was evident that the system was intent on keeping them apart, isolated, and closely monitored until justice could prevail. In April 2024, a long and intense trial concluded with a verdict that brought closure to a troubling chapter in Kitsap County's history. The court found Danny J. Kelly Jr., Robert Bobby Watson III, and Johnny James Watson guilty on 30 charges, including first-degree murder, premeditated murder, and arson. The severity of their crimes, including the brutal killings and the intentional destruction of a family home, left no room for leniency. As the courtroom prepared for sentencing, the atmosphere was filled with deep sadness as the victims' loved ones came forward to share their memories and grief. Carly Schaap, the mother of Hunter Schaap, made a poignant statement by placing an urn with her son's ashes next to a photo of him at the lectern. 8 relatives, all deeply affected by their loss, addressed the court, reminiscing about their loved ones while pleading with the judge for the harshest possible sentences for the men convicted. Carly and other family members openly expressed the ongoing pain and suffering that have impacted their blended family since that tragic night on January 27, 2017. On May 7, 2024, the court sentenced them to life in prison without the possibility of parole. They would have no chance of freedom. The Cariaga killers would spend the rest of their lives behind bars, held responsible for devastating a family and tearing apart a community. For the investigators who had followed leads, faced setbacks, and pieced together evidence, this outcome was a hard-earned success. It served as a somber reminder of the consequences of violence, but also affirmed that justice, though slow, ultimately prevails. To make matters worse, in another incident, in 2018, they suffered another blow when Joseph Carrega, a young family member, died in a car crash near Hansville. This additional loss deepened the sorrow and pain already weighing heavily on their hearts. The tragic story of the Cariaga family is a haunting reminder of how deep pain can ripple far beyond the immediate loss, touching the lives of loved ones and entire communities. What was a quiet life ended in unimaginable violence, fueled by a dark underworld that most would rather not see. Even as justice was served with life sentences, the shadows left behind linger. As the dust settles, it leaves you wondering how many more lives are quietly caught in the crossfire of secrets and violence that we may never fully understand. Not all relationships are healthy. Some can be harmful, leave lasting emotional and physical damage. This is the troubling story of a romance between a prominent dentist and her coworker. From the beginning, their relationship displayed signs of turmoil. Over nearly 5 years, they broke up and reconciled multiple times. Despite the ups and downs, she remained optimistic, giving him numerous opportunities. In reality, he never truly let her go. He employed various forms of emotional manipulation, pressure, and psychological control to keep her close. When she finally gathered the strength to take charge of her life and informed him of her decision to move on for good, it triggered a series of events with catastrophic consequences. Preeti Reddy was born in the lively Indian city of Pimpri Chinchwad, located along the Pavana River. The family enjoyed a comfortable life due to her parents' stable and substantial income. Preeti grew up with her younger sister Nithya. From a young age, the sisters developed a strong bond and were almost inseparable. They shared everything: childhood secrets, dreams, and challenges. Their parents created a loving environment, emphasizing strong cultural values and respect for family. As financially secure individuals, their parents were committed to investing in their daughter's well-being and future. Education was a top priority in the Reddy home. The girls were given every opportunity to thrive. In 1996, the Reddy family made a significant change by moving to Australia in search of better opportunities and a brighter future. They settled in a quiet suburb of Sydney and bought a spacious home that quickly became their refuge. Preeti and Nithya started attending a well-regarded private school, where both thrived academically. Preeti developed into a bright, charismatic young woman who was friendly, sociable, and ambitious. From an early age, and she aspired to follow her parents' path in healthcare, finding true joy in helping others and making a positive impact. After finishing high school, Preeti made an unexpected decision to return to India to study dentistry at a medical university in New Delhi. Her parents, always supportive, trusted her choices and allowed her the freedom to decide for herself. By 2019, Preeti had earned her degree and returned to Sydney, where she moved back in with her family. She started working at the Dental and Physiotherapy Centre in Western Sydney, while also enhancing her skills at the Royal Dental Hospital in Melbourne. Later, she joined Glenbrook Dental, a comprehensive care clinic where she worked as a general practitioner. Highly skilled and passionate about her profession, Dr. Preeti Reddy was recognized by her colleagues and patients as a rising star in dentistry. She was committed to continuous learning and improving her expertise. In early 2013, just before a major life event, she was enrolled in specialized courses for dental implants, hoped to open her own clinic in Melbourne. Unfortunately, those dreams would remain unfulfilled. While still studying at the Royal Dental Hospital in Melbourne, Preeti met a young dentist named Harshwardhan Nard, whom his friends called Harshwardhan Nard. He, like Preeti, was of Indian descent and came from a family of healthcare professionals. Following their tradition by pursuing a career in dentistry, the two quickly connected, feeling an attraction toward each other almost right away. A few months into their friendship, they started dating, but early on, some warning signs emerged. Harshwardhan was possessive and had a quick temper. He frequently questioned Preeti's choices, emotionally manipulated her, and tried to control her subtly. He also undermined her confidence, making her feel inadequate or inferior. He often blamed her for his struggles and claimed she was the source of his pain. Nithya, Preeti's younger sister, was the first to sense that something was wrong. She knew Preeti was dating someone, but Preeti had never introduced him to the family. She never brought him home and avoided talking about him. At the same time, Preeti's behavior changed. She became withdrawn, insecure, and distant. The spark in her eyes faded, turning her from a joyful and confident woman into someone who seemed tense, under emotional strain. Harshwardhan was controlling the relationship, and Preeti appeared trapped. Their parents often asked to meet this man in Preeti's life, but she consistently changed the subject or refused to discuss it. It was clear that she felt uncomfortable in the relationship, yet she remained emotionally tied to Harshwardhan and found it difficult to escape. Harshwardhan lived in Tamworth and worked at a dental clinic. He was in a long-distance relationship with Preeti, as they never lived together. Deep down, she felt that their relationship wouldn't end well. It was unstable, filled with frequent arguments and emotional tension, leaving Preeti feeling overwhelmed. For a long time, she kept their relationship a secret. It wasn't until about 6 months in that she shared it with a few close friends. Preeti's sister, Nithya, met Harshwardhan a few times and immediately disliked him. She later remembered feeling that there was something unsettling about his presence. By 2014, Preeti and Harshwardhan were publicly acknowledged as a couple, but their relationship remained complicated. Preeti never introduced him to her parents and refused to meet his family. Soon after, they broke up, but Preeti chose to keep it private. This cycle of breaking up and getting back together continued for years. At times, she wouldn't inform anyone about their breakups, and at other times, she wouldn't admit they had reconciled. it became clear that she felt embarrassed by their unstable relationship. Harshvardhan often accused Preeti of not investing enough in their relationship and pushed her to move to Tamworth so they could live together. However, Preeti was resolute. She didn't want to abandon her career or leave her family in Sydney. Meanwhile, Harshvardhan was unwilling to move for her. In the fall of 2016, Preeti and Harshvardhan broke up again. Preeti wanted it to be final this time, but Harshvardhan wasn't ready to let go. In October, he started planning a surprise party for her upcoming 30th birthday. However, the surprise did not happen because Preeti had already organized a celebration at her parents' house, invited close friends and colleagues, deliberately excluding Harshvardhan. Despite this clear message, Harshvardhan continued to try to re-enter her life. He pleaded for another chance, insisting that he had changed and that things would be different this time. Although he had never been physically aggressive, his constant emotional pressure had caused Preeti significant distress. This lack of visible harm may have contributed to Preeti deciding to give him one last opportunity, hoping for a fresh start. However, things did not improve. Preeti still had emotional feelings for Harshvardhan, which made it difficult to cut ties completely. Additionally, Harshvardhan manipulated her emotions, making her feel guilty for the end of their relationship. In 2018, Preeti made one last attempt to save her relationship, but soon realized that no matter how much she tried or sacrificed, nothing was going to change. That fall, she decided to end it for good. Just a few weeks later, in November, she met a young physician from Melbourne, and they quickly formed a genuine connection. This new man was everything Harshvardhan was not: kind, attentive, and compassionate. For the first time in years, Preeti was open about her relationship, proudly introducing him to her family and friends. She felt truly happy and hopeful about the future. She even considered moving to Melbourne to be closer to him by applying for jobs in the area. Prestigious dental centers quickly responded to her applications, and after receiving multiple offers, she chose a clinic where she hoped to work after completing her responsibilities in Sydney. In December, she excitedly told her friends that she had never felt this way before. She had finally moved on from her past. Her loved ones were delighted to see her so happy. But unfortunately, this joy was short-lived. In January, Harshvardhan found out that Preeti was in a new relationship. Overwhelmed by jealousy and anger, he began contacting her again through calls and messages, hoping to meet her. However, Preeti had decided to move on and ignored all of his attempts to reach her. By February, during a phone conversation with his brother, Harshvardhan admitted that he couldn't accept what he felt was a betrayal. He spoke about Preeti as if she were still his, viewing her new relationship as a personal insult. He expressed that he wouldn't let her marry someone else and suggested he might take extreme actions. At the time, his words seemed like mere bitter threats, stemming from frustration and a sense of powerlessness. On March 31st, 2019, Sydney hosted a two-day international dental conference showcasing the latest advancements in dentistry. Dr. Preeti attended the conference and stayed at the Swissôtel Hotel with two close friends and colleagues. Her ex-boyfriend, Dr. Harshvardhan, also rented a room at this hotel. After the first day, Preeti shared with her friends that she felt uneasy because Harshvardhan was watching her closely throughout the conference and seemed to be waiting for a chance to talk to her. His behavior was making her feel uncomfortable and unpredictable. Later that evening, the friends went to a nightclub to relax, but Preeti still felt anxious and kept looking over her shoulder. The second day was filled with even more tension as Harshvardhan insisted they meet and talk. Preeti felt anxious and conflicted, while her friends urged her not to give in despite their concerns. After the conference, she reluctantly decided to speak with Harshvardhan, hoping to resolve their issues. She had practiced what she wanted to say, wishing he would listen and put an end to the drama so she could continue with her life. At around 6:30 p.m. on March 2nd, surveillance cameras recorded a gray Volkswagen Golf, which belonged to Preeti, leaving the underground garage of Swissôtel Hotel. Preeti was driving, and Harshvardhan was seated next to her. About an hour later, they arrived at the Ravi's Cumin Indian restaurant in nearby Crow's Nest and entered together. Witnesses, including other diners and restaurant staff, noted that there was significant tension at their table. Pretty looked anxious and wanted to leave, while Harshwarden tried to hold her hand and interrupted her as she spoke. The waiter in charge of their table recalled that Preeti mentioned she was planning to move to Melbourne, confessed to being in love with someone else, and asked Harshwarden to let her go. Despite this, Harshwarden seemed unaware of her feelings. He continued to talk about marriage and promised to move to Sydney just to be close to her. Around 10:16 p.m., they left the restaurant and walked to their car but didn't get in. They argued for over an hour at that spot. Surveillance cameras show Harshwarden reaching out towards Preeti, then pushing her as she backed away and took a step back, causing her to stumble. They finally drove off close to midnight and spent another 15 minutes driving around the city before stopping in a mall parking lot. Neither of them got out of the car. Surveillance cameras on the building captured them in a heated argument, with Harshwarden making wild gestures and Preeti crying visibly. At about 2 p.m., Preeti got out of the car and entered a 24-hour fast food restaurant in the mall. She bought a bottle of water and waited near the entrance, seemingly for Harshwarden to come out. However, when she went back, he was still sitting in the car. They then drove to the Swissôtel Hotel. He quietly led Preeti past the front desk and into his suite. After around 3 a.m., she did not leave. On the morning of March 3rd, around 10 a.m., Preeti called her younger sister to say she would be home in a couple of hours. That was the last time anyone heard from her. Her family expected her to be home by lunchtime, but she never arrived. It was unusual for her phone to be off. By 3 p.m., worry turned into panic. Preeti was always in contact and would inform someone if she was running late. Her family quickly began reaching out to her friends and coworkers to find out where she might be. It was then they discovered that she had been seen at a conference with her ex, Harshwarden, who was reportedly trying to reconnect with her and had been persistent. Nithya attempted to call Harshwarden, but he either ignored her calls or didn't answer, even though his phone was still on. On the evening of March 3rd, the Reddy family went to the police to report Preeti missing, expressing their concerns that her ex-boyfriend might be involved. Simultaneously, they began their own search by reaching out to anyone who might have seen or talked to Preeti. Nithya also posted on social media, sharing recent photos and asking for any information to help locate her sister. Within 24 hours, her posts reached nearly 2,000 people, including Preeti's former patients. Many offered to assist in the search or to help spread the word, but no one had any concrete information about Preeti's location. The only potential lead remained Harshwarden, who continued to avoid answering calls. On the afternoon of March 4th, Harshwarden finally took one of Nithya's calls. He responded in a disturbingly calm manner, stating that Preeti was an adult who would return soon. He acknowledged seeing her at the conference, but claimed they had only spoken briefly before going their separate ways. Oddly, just an hour later, Harshwarden called Nithya back, this time very angry. He yelled at her, asking why she was contacting his friends, family, and co-workers about Preeti. He accused the Reddy family of unfairly blaming him and damaging his reputation without any proof. His reaction raised serious concerns, while he showed little worry about Preeti's sudden disappearance or the possibility that she might be in danger. He seemed more upset that people were searching for her and that attention was being directed at him. After discovering the situation, it was clear that Preeti had agreed to meet Harshwarden for dinner, and he likely became the last person to see her. Harshwarden's family urged him to go to the police and provide a full account before any formal summons. Later that day, he went to a police station in Sydney, saying he wanted to assist and share what he knew. Officers quickly noticed his unusual behavior. He was sweating, visibly anxious, and pacing while gesturing wildly. He claimed to have seen Preeti not only at a conference but also during dinner on March 2nd. He stated that they had a final conversation that helped them both move on, and that he called her a cab, which he said was the last time he saw her. However, there were inconsistencies in his story. When asked to repeat the events, he became confused, contradicted himself, and struggled to keep his timeline consistent. Despite his odd behavior, the police had no solid evidence to detain him, so they let him go. Before he left, a detective casually mentioned that they were examining surveillance footage that might show the movements of both Preeti and Harshvardhan that evening, intending to reconstruct the timeline. This statement appeared to unsettle Harshvardhan. A few hours later, he returned to the police station and changed his story. He confessed that he hadn't called a cab for Preeti. She had actually driven herself in her own car, which was the same Volkswagen Golf they had used to go to the restaurant. When questioned about why he had initially lied, he said he was nervous and didn't think those details were important. Later that day, on March 4th, news reported a serious car accident on the New England highway. A BMW had sped into oncoming traffic and collided head-on with a truck. The driver was pronounced dead at the scene and was identified as Dr. Harshvardhan Nard. This raised the question, how did he end up in such a terrible accident on a mostly empty road? Surveillance footage showed that Harshvardhan had quickly sped up and deliberately driven into the truck's path. This incident appeared to be an act of self-harm, and further evidence soon supported this idea. It was evident that the detective's mention of the footage had left Harshvardhan visibly shaken. He likely understood that investigators would soon reconstruct the events of the entire evening. The day after Harshvardhan's death, Preeti's abandoned Volkswagen Golf was discovered in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Sydney. Inside the trunk, in a large blue suitcase, was her lifeless body. Forensic investigators later confirmed that she had suffered a severe head injury and multiple stab wounds, 11 in total, mostly to her neck and back. 2 days later, after reviewing security footage and interviewing witnesses, the police were able to piece together the events of March 2nd. Preeti had agreed to meet Harshvardhan for dinner, likely seeking closure and trying to move on from their relationship. A waiter, who overheard parts of their conversation, remembered that Preeti appeared upset and frightened. After dinner, they drove around for a few hours before arriving at Swissatel Hotel. It is suspected that he emotionally manipulated her, a tactic he had used in the past, making her feel guilty. Since she was never seen leaving the hotel, detectives believe that the tragic event likely took place in the room. A forensic investigation uncovered traces of blood in the bathroom, although it had been cleaned so thoroughly that housekeeping noticed nothing unusual. It is thought that Preeti went to the bathroom to call her new partner, and that Harshvardhan, overhearing the call, became enraged. Once she ended the call, he attacked her from behind, hitting her on the head and then inflicting multiple wounds with a sharp object. After finishing what he had to do, Harshvardhan calmly cleaned himself up and went to the front desk to extend his stay for another night. He had breakfast in the hotel restaurant before heading out to shop at local stores. There, he bought a large blue suitcase and various cleaning supplies. He returned to his hotel room around 5 p.m., checked out, and when a staff member offered to help with his luggage, they remarked that the suitcase seemed quite heavy. Harshvardhan casually explained that he had bought too many gifts for his family. He then loaded his belongings into Preeti's Volkswagen Golf and drove to a quiet corner of the city, where he parked the car in a discreet spot, hoping it would remain unnoticed for some time. After everything that happened, Harshvardhan picked up his BMW from the parking garage and drove home to Tamworth. On the way, he stopped at a gas station to fill his tank and grab some coffee. Several witnesses later identified him there, noting that his phone kept ringing, but he either declined the calls or ignored them. It was later confirmed that those calls were from Nithya, who was desperately trying to contact him while looking for her sister. Harshvardhan likely thought he had committed the perfect crime, covering his tracks so well that investigators wouldn't be able to connect him to anything. He hadn't considered that there were surveillance cameras at almost every place he and Preeti had gone that day. Those recordings would soon reveal the truth. When Harshvardhan understood his error, that the police would have clear evidence of his involvement, he decided not to wait for an arrest or trial. Instead, he took control of the situation and ended his life before justice could catch up with him. Harshvardhan's family, despite the increasing evidence against him, struggled to accept the idea that he could commit such a terrible act. They found it hard to believe he could take another person's life in such a brutal and deliberate way. Meanwhile, the Reddy family, grieving the loss of their cherished daughter and sister, decided to take action. They started a campaign to create the first center in Australia focused on helping women impacted by domestic violence. This center would not only provide emotional support, but also offer safe housing, legal advice, and help for those trying to leave abusive or manipulative relationships. The Reddy family played a key role in supporting the project by providing funding, using their voices to raise public awareness through media and outreach. They made sure that people in need were aware of a safe place to go, where they could find both protection and support for healing.
On April 16th, 2024, just after 11 a.m., in a quiet apartment building in Iztacalco, Mexico City, the sun shone brightly and the streets were peaceful. Inside one of the apartments, a teenage girl was finishing her schoolwork while her mother ran a quick errand. Everything seemed normal, but someone was watching someone familiar with the apartment's layout and who had been there before. What happened in the following minutes would profoundly impact the community and reveal a hidden nightmare that had persisted for over a decade. This marked the beginning of a shocking revelation. In April 2024, 17-year-old Maria Jose Castillo Calles was living a peaceful life in Mexico City with her mother, Cassandra Calles. They had recently settled into a modest apartment in the Iztacalco borough. Maria was a kind, compassionate girl with a love for motorcycles and animals, especially her cherished dogs. Neighbors described her as polite, calm, and dedicated to her studies. She rarely went out, spending most of her time focused on schoolwork and preparing for her university entrance exams. Her dream was to study international business, build a successful career, and one day provide financial support for her mother. However, someone had been watching her. Maria Jose and her mother, Cassandra Calles, were unaware that a man had been entering their apartment multiple times. It's unclear whether he used a hidden key or entered through a window, but he clearly knew their daily routine well. On the morning of April 16th, Cassandra left to run errands, not realizing it would be the last time she saw her daughter alive. Security footage later released to the media showed Cassandra walking down the street with the man following closely behind, waiting for the right moment to act. Meanwhile, Maria was in her bedroom doing homework when her stalker walked in. She screamed for help, alerting the neighbors, but he quickly overpowered her and brutally stabbed her multiple times. Cassandra sensed something was wrong and returned home early, only to find a shocking scene: her daughter lying lifeless on the floor, with an attacker still present, assaulting her. Before Cassandra could react, the man lunged at her, stabbing her multiple times. Despite her injuries, she was able to call for help. Neighbors who heard the earlier screams quickly came to assist. Some confronted the attacker, while others helped Cassandra and called emergency services. The police arrived swiftly, rescuing the suspect from an angry mob of residents. Paramedics confirmed that Maria was dead, and Cassandra was taken to the hospital in critical condition. The suspect is Miguel Cortez Miranda, a 39-year-old man who had lived in the same building for over 10 years. On the surface, Miguel appeared to lead a normal life. He was born in Mexico City on October 25, 1984, as the youngest child of a homemaker and a university professor in microbiology. From a young age, Miguel showed both exceptional intelligence and troubling behavior, including experimenting with chemicals on cars, household items, and later, animals. In school, he studied to be a bacteriological chemist and parasitologist, and later graduated from the National School of Biological Sciences and the Instituto Politécnico Nacional. By 2008, he secured a job in a laboratory where he analyzed food and water. He graduated with honors and worked for reputable companies, earning a solid reputation as a professional by his mid-20s. However, hidden beneath his polished appearance was a darker side. Miguel posted on social media images of cemeteries, skulls, preserved animals. He shared unsettling jokes and wrote poetry about death and spiritual pain. In 2014, he transformed into an avant-garde artist, leaving his previous career behind. He acted in independent theater, frequently taking on roles of the deceased, and became active in vegan and animal rights movements. While neighbors considered him eccentric yet harmless, they were mistaken. Investigators made a troubling discovery while looking into Maria Jose's case. She was not the only victim of Miguel. authorities conducted searches on 3 properties related to him. In his apartment, they found disturbing evidence: surgical tools, saws, human bones, blood-stained items, and a container holding the remains of at least 20 different people. Along with these remains were IDs and personal belongings, predominantly belonging to women. Even more unsettling were 3 handwritten notebooks, which Miguel had used to detail his crimes. These entries dated back to 2012, indicating a pattern of horror that lasted over a decade. Many of the potential victims were believed to be missing students or escorts associated with Miguel. Over the years, forensic teams began the slow task of identifying the remains through genetic testing. The revelations stunned the nation. Miguel, once seen as an educated, quiet man with a curious mind, was now at the center of one of the most grotesque crime cases in modern Mexico. Leaked pages from his journals hinted at past trauma, including alleged abuse by his father. While some reports claimed his mother and sister ignored his suffering, his sister publicly denied this, though she did acknowledge that both siblings had endured a violent upbringing. In the days following the arrest of Miguel, silence from authorities gave way to a wave of speculation. The media quickly dubbed him the monster of Iztacalco and Dahmer Mexican, comparing his crimes to those of the infamous Jeffrey Dahmer, an American serial killer who murdered 17 young men and kept their remains in his apartment for years without detection. Local officials referred to him simply as the feminicidal killer. As journalists began to investigate further, unsettling details about Miguel's online presence surfaced on social media. He had long been posting disturbing poetry, some of which, in hindsight, appeared to describe his crimes in abstract artistic language. Hidden behind a facade of intellectualism and eccentricity, Miguel had managed to avoid suspicion for over a decade. The most disturbing revelation came when a crime reporter leaked video footage of his first court appearance. In it, Miguel appeared calm, even smiling, as he listened to the charges. During the hearing, he confessed in graphic detail to the murder of Maria Jose. He explained that on the day of the attack, he believed the apartment was empty. It was not his first time breaking in. When Maria Jose unexpectedly spotted him, she screamed for help. He claimed he asked her to stop, and when she didn't, something in him snapped. He described entering a state of frenzy and attacking her violently. He also admitted that after Cassandra returned home, he intended to kill her too. Following his confession, the court charged Miguel with the gender-based murder of Maria Jose and attempted murder for the brutal attack on Cassandra. He was ordered to remain in prison as the investigation expanded outside the courtroom. Grief turned to outrage. Friends, classmates, and neighbors gathered outside the apartment complex to hold a memorial mass and built an altar in Maria Jose's honor. The call for justice grew louder. Families of other missing women came forward, demanding that authorities identify the remains found in Miguel's home. Soon, long-forgotten names and heartbreaking stories resurfaced. For many, it had been years since they last saw their daughters, sisters, or friends. On May 3, 2024, the Attorney General of Mexico City confirmed what many feared. DNA results had identified several of the victims. Among them were Amirani Roblero Gonzalez, 18, Karen Ornelas Balzataz, 21, Frida Sofia Lima Rivera, 32, Viviana Elizabeth Garrido Ibarra, 32, Claudia Andrea A, 36, Norma Elena O, 41, Cynthia Vanessa E, 39, and Laura V, 33. Each of these women had disappeared at different times over the last 10 years. Their confirmed deaths revealed the massive scope of Miguel's atrocities and raised a terrifying question. How had this predator gone unnoticed for so long? As the media swarmed the story, one victim's identity, Frida Sofia Lima Rivera, was verified by the discovery of her skull. But this was far from the last revelation. Authorities began investigating whether Miguel, using his background in chemistry, had found ways to preserve more bodies. Experts feared that many more victims could be hidden in storage or elsewhere, their identities still unknown. With the identification of known victims, the timeline of Miguel's murders started to take shape. Investigators think that his first verified murder took place in 2012. The victim was Amirani Roblero Gonzalez, an intelligent and athletic 18-year-old who was born in Mexico City on December 26, 1993. Amirani was the third of 4 children in a diligent family. In 2012, she had just finished her studies in business administration and was getting ready to go to university to study engineering. On August 1st of that year, she left home to attend a preparatory course and intended to pick up her graduation photos. She never came back. Her disappearance was reported the following day, but instead of being taken seriously, the authorities dismissed the case. Officers joked that she likely ran off with a boyfriend. From the moment her family reported her missing, crucial mistakes were made. By the time investigators requested it, security footage from nearby cameras had already been erased. Phone records, which could have helped track her last known movements, were not obtained because telecommunications companies did not cooperate. Additionally, the official missing person bulletin had inaccuracies, particularly regarding her age, which caused confusion and slowed down the search efforts. Authorities discovered that Amirani had been in contact with Miguel, who was with her on the day she went missing to collect graduation photos. However, he was quickly ruled out as a suspect due to his reputation as a respected young professional, which seemed to protect him unfairly. While the Amirani's family endured their suffering, Miguel continued to lead a double life. In December 2012, just a few months later, Miguel targeted his next victim, 21-year-old Karen Ornelas Baltazar, a clinical lab technician. At that time, Karen was studying pharmaceutical chemistry at the Instituto Politécnico Nacional. Miguel, who was her supervisor at the laboratory, showed an inappropriate interest in her. Karen brushed off his advances, but her boyfriend felt that something was wrong with Miguel, a concern that would sadly turn out to be true. On December 1, 2012, Miguel planned a surprise birthday party for Karen at his apartment. Friends and co-workers attended the celebration. Not knowing about the plans Miguel had, Karen spent the evening with a few colleagues and decided to go home early the next morning. Miguel offered to accompany her to the metro station but returned alone later that day and did not explain where she had gone. The following day, Karen was reported missing. Suspicion quickly turned to Miguel, the last person known to have seen Karen alive. Days later, her body was discovered. The autopsy determined that she died from bronchoaspiration caused by alcohol intoxication, but her family did not believe this explanation. Karen's body had multiple bruises, which the police attributed to a fall. Her family was left with lingering questions and a growing sense that something much more troubling had occurred. Miguel attended Karen's funeral, where he acted politely and expressed his condolences to her grieving family. No one suspected that the killer was there among them. He managed to keep up his pretense long enough to choose his third victim, Frida Sofia Lima Rivera. Frida was a 32-year-old from a large family struggling financially. She moved to Mexico City to pursue her dream of studying industrial administration at the Instituto Politécnico Nacional. Fortunately, she became neighbors with Miguel. Miguel quickly gained Frida's trust, and their friends noticed a strong bond between them, leading some to speculate about a potential romance. However, Frida viewed Miguel as a mentor who was helping her navigate the challenges of city life and academic pressures. In early 2013, Miguel's behavior changed dramatically. He quit his job at the lab, stopped posting emotional updates on social media, and began focusing on new interests. He adopted a vegan lifestyle, became involved in animal rights activism, and distanced himself from his former friends. By February 2014, after returning from a solitary trip in the mountains, Miguel appeared revitalized and focused, though investigators would later uncover that he was preparing for something much darker. In December 2014, Frida disappeared. Her last known online activity was on December 7th. Due to her family's remote location in Moros, with limited communication, they didn't realize she was missing until February 2015. Frida's sister and their mother went to Mexico City to report her missing. Unfortunately, the authorities were dismissive, suggesting that Frida might have run away with a boyfriend. With no help from the police, her family attempted to search for her on their own, but after several months without any progress and running out of resources, they had to go back home. Miguel, who was the main suspect, pretended to offer support and sympathy while remaining under suspicion. The police did nothing with the only significant clue, phone records showing that Miguel had called Frida's phone number. As time went on, each visit from Frida's family to the police resulted in silence and empty promises, while Miguel continued his life without any interruptions. In September 2018, he began working at a quality control lab, where he met his fourth known victim, Viviana Elizabeth Garrido Ibarra. Viviana was a 32-year-old biochemical engineer and a mother to a 9-year-old girl. She admired Miguel's professionalism, and they developed a connection. However, less than 3 months later, she disappeared. On November 30th, 2018, Viviana said goodbye to a co-worker after finishing her shift and headed to the metro, but she never returned home. Her disappearance prompted serious police investigations, and several of her co-workers, including Miguel, were questioned. Yet, like in earlier cases, he managed to avoid suspicion. Despite his connection to multiple missing women, he remained undetected. This raised a troubling question. Was it due to police incompetence, or had Miguel become an expert at deception? In 2019, a year later, Miguel switched jobs once more and started working at a well-known private hospital's lab. It was there that he reconnected with Claudia Andrea A., a former colleague who would later become his fifth victim. Their professional relationship soon turned romantic, and Claudia frequently shared their happy moments on social media, smiling for the camera, unaware of the horrific fate that lay ahead for her. On December 27, 2019, Claudia disappeared on her 36th birthday after making plans for a celebration with Miguel. Concerned when they hadn't heard from her, her brother and their mother went to her apartment. They found the door unlocked, towels stuffed under the frame, and discovered Claudia's decomposing body in her bed. The initial forensic report indicated she died from respiratory failure, but her family had doubts. The messy state of the apartment, the makeshift measures to cover up the smell, and Claudia's relationship with Miguel raised significant questions. Despite their concerns, the police decided not to investigate further and closed the case. On December 31st, Claudia was buried, but shortly after, suspicious transactions appeared on her bank account between January 1st and 2nd, 2020. Additionally, several of her personal items, including her ID and phone, went missing. This situation led her family to request that the investigation be reopened. Investigators stated they were reviewing security footage, but interest in the case quickly diminished. Meanwhile, Miguel returned to living quietly in his apartment. The indifference of the system became his strongest ally. In April 2024, a violent attack on Maria Jose and her mother, Cassandra, led to a significant breakthrough. The arrest of Miguel revealed his troubling history, prompting investigators to piece together the evidence against him. This development rekindled hope for the families of his earlier victims, who had felt silenced for too long. Cassandra, the sole survivor of Miguel's assaults, slowly healed from her injuries. In interviews with the local media, she recounted her terrifying experience from that unforgettable April morning. By early 2025, authorities projected that Miguel's victim count could be at least 20. However, even with the shocking evidence and public outcry, updates from officials have been rare. The investigation is still ongoing, and a trial date has yet to be announced. The journey toward justice is long and uncertain. For now, families hold on to hope that the man who has escaped justice for over a decade will finally be held accountable. Their voices, once drowned out by bureaucracy and apathy, are now growing stronger. The case of Miguel Angel Cortez is no longer just about a serial predator. It highlights the failures of a system that has ignored these issues for too long. For the victims, this narrative is not just about their deaths, but about ensuring they are never forgotten. In an unexpected turn of events, on the morning of April 13, 2025, Miguel Cortez Miranda was found on the floor of his cell at Reclusorio Oriente and was immediately taken to Iztapa General Hospital, where he died. His cause of death was ruled to be cardiac arrest due to a prescription drug overdose, aggravated by head trauma when he fell from his bunk bed. Due to his sudden death, Mexican authorities opened an investigation to determine if there was anything suspicious surrounding the incident. At the time of his death, Miguel was scheduled to appear in court and was under investigation for making phone calls to the victim's relatives. Due to his death, investigations into his case were discontinued. The sudden death of Miguel Cortez Miranda may have closed a dark chapter, but it left countless questions unanswered and wounds unhealed. For the families of Maria Jose, Amairani, Karen, Frida, Viviana, Claudia, and others, the loss remains a haunting reminder of a predator who thrived in the shadows of systemic neglect, while their voices now echo louder, demanding accountability and reform. The fight for justice continues, not only to honor the memory of those taken, but to ensure such horrors are never overlooked again. This case, etched in Mexico's collective consciousness, stands as both a tragedy and a call to action, urging society to confront the failures that allowed a monster to hide in plain sight for far too long.